Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Welcome to this episode of The Murder Part. Tonight, we will be looking at the case of Jodi Arias. I'm here with my co-host, Jeff and Mike. How you doing, guys?
Very good.
Doing pretty well.
Let's do a brief introduction so everybody can kind of learn who you are. We've done this before. I think we did it in a video. Was it last week as well? And what was that? What was that video?
Christian Gerhard Strider.
That's right. Gerhard Strider. Interesting case. So I'll start with you, Jeff.
Yeah, my name is Jeff Pincin. I am a licensed clinical mental health counselor in Delaware and Pennsylvania, and I specialize in OCD, and happy to be here tonight.
So if you weren't a counselor, like if you didn't become a counselor, what would you have wanted to do with your career?
Probably be really high up in a multi-level marketing company. That's everyone's ideal, right?
That's an incredible dream.
I think so.
But instead you ended up as a counselor.
Yeah. Unfortunately,
It's terrible.
Sorry to hear that.
I really just wanted to hustle for my income and try to get people, in with me and make some money off of their contribution. But
yeah, get that pyramid scheme-esque thing going.
I'm a counselor.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you have to settle for helping people
It's terrible.
with your day.
Literally terrible.
Yeah, careers don't work out for everybody. And that's hit or miss sometimes.
Yeah, it really is. Really is.
All right, Mike.
Well, I'm Mike Smith. I'm also a licensed professional counselor in the state of Delaware. I specialize in narrative therapy and geek therapy. I'm a self-styled expert in all things geek culture.
So if you weren't a mental health counselor, what other career choices?
I don't know. I often thought about being a motivational speaker because I like to talk, but it didn't pan out.
And you ended up as a counselor.
Yeah, just ended up as a counselor.
That's a tough break.
Yeah.
Motivational speaker. That's a great career.
Yeah, it would be.
But instead, a counselor.
But instead, I'm a listener.
Instead of a speaker, you're a motivational listener.
I'm a motivational listener and a motivational interviewer.
That's right. That's right.
So you traded the motivation for the geek.
Yeah, well, yeah. Unfortunately, that's where my passions lie, so that's where I had to go.
Excellent. So let's get started with this case. So we've talked about a few different cases, right? We've covered JonBenet Ramsey, Gerhard Strider, Michael Morton, fascinating case. We've looked at Darlie Rotier, or however you pronounce her name. Yep. And I think you can really divide all true crime into kind of like the classics, mid-range popularity type crimes, and the lesser popular, like the ones that they're interesting. They might be more interesting than the more popular ones, but they're not well known.
Right.
And, in the category of mega popular, you have Scott Peterson, JonBenet Ramsey, Gary Ridgway,
Betty Broderick,
Ted Bundy, Dahmer, the Golden State Killer, Joseph DeAngelo, Casey Anthony, O.J. Simpson. Jodi Arias is among that group.
Truly.
She is one of the classic cases. And last I checked, she is still alive. She's in prison for life. And I've had people write me before and say that they wrote her. Mm-hmm. I've had that quite a few times. And they usually describe her as something like nice. I don't know exactly what that means. It's not highly specific, but I guess just cordial and kind of gets along.
That's how she came across to, many different people. Probably Travis Alexander, I would imagine, at least at first. But probably how she came across to a lot of friends and probably even some people that perhaps there was some manipulation going on as well to maybe try to date somebody or to maybe even be a friend or something. And she also had an interest in the multi-level marketing company that Travis Alexander was a part of. So she already had perhaps this personality that lent itself to talking to people, trying to get them to join in with what she was doing. So the personality suits her of, giving a nice persona, but also maybe having some kind of a darker side.
Yeah. Well, I think it was a prepaid legal.
I think you're right.
Was the yeah. So, and we'll talk about that, but yeah, a lot of people liked Jodi Arias, and of course, in the end, maybe not as many people do. But there is a Betty Broderick feel to this case that I think will come clear. Usually when you're talking about a murder case, you have a perpetrator and a victim. And traditionally, we're mad at the perpetrator and we feel sorry for the victim. But sometimes perpetrators do things to mitigate their guilt, like acting in a self-defense fashion or heat of the moment or something like that. And victims do things that aren't too flattering. And I think that is the dynamic in this case. Jodi Arias, a lot of people have taken her side. I don't think as many as take Betty Broderick's side, but a lot, and a lot of people genuinely dislike Travis Alexander. Talk about a victim that does not get a lot of empathy.
Yeah.
Yeah, in general, like when it came to the trial, a lot of that trial was putting Travis Alexander on trial, putting his character out there on trial, and a lot of his friends, a lot of his family, a lot of people who genuinely knew him actually took really big exception with the things that were said about him at that trial. But to the general public, a lot of that came off as just being protective of him and his legacy because he's dead. Let's don't talk bad about the dead and things like that. And like they kind of really believed the things that were being said about Travis.
Yeah, I think one of the lessons from true crime is to try to prevent similar crimes in the future and to try to understand dynamics that can lead to danger. So I'm okay with the idea of shining a bright light on all the people involved in these cases, understanding that, a little bit of latitude has to be given to the victim because they can't defend themselves. So like I factor that in. But outside that, I'm all right looking at the good, the bad, and the ugly in these cases.
For the sake of learning, you're saying, for the sake of identifying key factors that maybe this is what went wrong?
Yeah, I think for learning and for just getting at the truth, I think there's value to the truth. Yeah. And I think what happens sometimes with the victims is, I think people are understandably sensitive toward what the victim goes through, which I think is natural and healthy. But at some point, if a person contributes to their own death, even if it wasn't their fault, like it mostly wasn't their fault, but they contribute in some way, it's good to find that out, right? It's like if somebody was at a stop sign in their car and they get hit by another car, like they're stopped and a car comes up and hits them, but they're not wearing their seatbelt. It's not their fault, but if they wore their seatbelt, things could have been better. So it's a learning lesson. Yeah. It's a life lesson. Like, okay, you can do something to protect yourself. Actually, I think it gives like power to victims to say there's something you can do. If you're in a bad relationship, like with somebody like Jodi Arias, you can see kind of like what maybe you're doing to contribute to that and either stop doing it or get out of it.
I agree, but I think the truth in these matters has to be weighed. Like we have the stories that are being told by a defendant in a court trial who's trying to mitigate their entire responsibility in what is arguably one of the worst crimes that can be committed by building up these charges against the victim who can't speak for themselves. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, there's going to be plenty of evidence to surround what they're saying. In other cases, there's not. I think that when we talk about Betty Broderick and Dan Broderick, there's plenty of evidence that Dan Broderick was just strong-arming her throughout the entire thing, and he was through their entire divorce, and that he was a very harsh partner to try and separate from. But there's not as much clear evidence with Travis Alexander of that. A lot of it is the word of Jodi Arias.
A lot of it is, yeah. And I think that's when I talk about the latitude. Like he can't defend himself, so we have to be generous in giving him the benefit of the doubt. Even still, there are some corroborated statements that do make it look like he was not asking to be killed or anything, but he wasn't the best romantic interest. And maybe a little bit aggressive, maybe a lot. I mean, it depends on, again, if you kind of believe how Jodi expanded on what we knew about Travis. But yeah, there are definitely people who defend Travis, and there's some people who think that he didn't do anything wrong the entire time, and Jodi kind of fabricated everything negative against him.
Yeah, I don't think it's that. I think it's somewhere in the middle. Mm. I think that there definitely was a very destructive relationship between the two of them. Whether it started with Jodi or with Travis, I can't rightly say I wasn't there for their entire relationship.
You were only there for a few years.
Yeah, I was just there, just in the middle there. No, I was on the East Coast. They were in Arizona. I wasn't part of it at all. I didn't get a chance to see their relationship except through the lens of like documentaries and Jodi's diary and things that were brought up in court. It definitely seems from the recordings and things that Jodi had, which there's a big question about why she had those recordings in the first place, but there was definitely a dynamic in their relationship that was problematic for both of them.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that makes this case so interesting is the homicide that occurs at the end. Spoiler alert.
It wouldn't be the murder part without a murder.
That's right.
Gotcha. No murder happened.
I think that many people look at that as coming from inside the relationship, like it was born in the relationship and it was nurtured in the relationship. So again, kind of whatever we can learn about that dynamic can help other people to avoid violence, even potentially homicidal violence, as we saw in this case.
That's a good point.
So let's take a look at the life of Jodi Arias. Now, one of the things that's important, and Mike, you touched on this, is a lot of the information about this case comes from Jodi Arias. Mm-hmm. I think she's by far the biggest producer of documentation in the case.
Much documentation.
There's a lot of documentation that comes directly from Jodi.
She was on the stand for 18 days during her trial. So, and that's not the sum total of what she discussed. So she was born in Salinas, California on July 9, 1980. So the same year that Airplane came out.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. A few months before.
Big fan of Airplane?
Yeah.
Big fan.
Jeff is a huge fan of Airplane.
It's my favorite movie by far. I remember I was way too young when my dad first showed it to me, but for whatever reason I got hooked on it. Probably because he loved it.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. Don't call me Shirley. Yeah, and I don't know how old I was, but probably single digits if I had to guess. And from there on, I was hooked. Yep.
One of my favorite scenes of that movie was when they were in the cockpit. Spoiler alert for Airplane 1980. And it was Leslie Nielsen was the physician, I believe, right, on board the aircraft. And as everything was going on, he kept coming into the cockpit and saying, we're pulling for you. We know you can do it.
Just want to let you both know we're counting, or I just want to tell you both good luck. We're all counting on you.
We did that like 6 or 7 times.
I think it's like 3 times or so, but it was at the worst time. The plane was going down, and he walks in very calm. I miss Leslie Nielsen.
Yeah, really one of the greats.
Yeah. He was a comedic genius, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. But started off in serious films, which is, I think uncommon. But I've seen some clips from the serious films, and I'm like, obviously I only know him from his funny stuff, but you look at it and you're like, how did he do that? How was he ever serious with anything, knowing what he did later on in his career?
Yeah, the whole idea behind Airplane in terms of, I think it was the Zucker brothers.
Zucker brothers, yeah.
Yeah, and then someone else too. Is it
Jim
Abrams?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the whole idea behind it was to get actors that were well respected for straight roles, like serious roles. Robert Stack, Lloyd Bridges, Leslie Nielsen. These were all very serious men. And, they weren't comedic at all. And then to bring them in and to kind of put these absurd events around them and have them just stay that same way as if nothing is out of the ordinary. Although Lloyd Bridges got away with the whole methamphetamine and the glue. I mean, he had
it's like I picked the wrong week to quit sniffing glue.
There's a new show that just came out recently with Robert Hayes, the guy that played Stryker in Airplane. And I don't remember the name of it now, but it's all about things that have gone wrong with travel and things like that, is my understanding of it. And the beginning of it, he references Airplane just very, very briefly. And he said, I played this role, an airplane that was going down. And then he just goes right into the show. And it hooked me because I was like, oh, it's Robert Hayes. He's in, he's doing something and he's referencing Airplane, but it was like seconds long. And then they just go into the rest of the show. And the show's fine, I guess. But I was expecting him to just rehash all of Airplane. That's all I was expecting.
You just wanted him to do the airplane thing. Do the airplane
That's
thing.
all I was waiting for.
Airplane, 1980.
Yeah.
Jodi Arias, born in 1980 as well.
Right, same year. So yeah, already we see a tremendous amount of parallels.
It's pretty much the same thing.
I wonder if she was over Macho Grande. She'll
I don't
never.
think I'll ever get over Macho Grande.
All right. So her father, Bill, owned restaurants, and her mother, Sandra, worked as a waitress at those restaurants. When she was 5 or 6, there was an incident reported by her babysitter where Jodi struck her brother in the head with a baseball bat. So that doesn't sound too good.
Yeah. Yeah, at 5 or 6, I might be willing to discount that as kind of like kids being kids kind of thing. Like, I don't think there was homicidal intention at that point.
Yeah, that's pretty young.
I was just like, I'm mad at you, or even like, we're just playing baseball. Conk. Oh, crap.
Yeah, just got away from her or whatever. Yeah. So Jodi would later say, so here we get into the subjective portion. She would later say that she was subject to strict discipline. And there's other people that say that never happened.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think the few comments her parents have made, and there haven't been many because they've stayed very tight-lipped about Jodi, is that she had a happy childhood.
Yeah. They said no abuse ever happened.
Right.
Nothing traumatizing.
Right. Now, one of the psychologists who interviewed her talked about that he had reason to believe that some of the things that she said were correct about there being physical discipline, and then at age 7 or 8, her father went to using a belt for that discipline. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but using an implement like that does often strike as abusive, but it depends on the way it's used. Like, if it's just every day he comes in, takes his belt off, starts wailing, like, that's clearly abuse. But if it's one of those you kind of ramp up in attitude and things you're doing until you like pick up a prized lamp and throw it against the wall, and that's when he goes, okay, we've reached the limit, and now you have to be disciplined. I'm taking off the belt. That's more in the lines of physical discipline, corporal punishment that's not usually acceptable today, but in the 1980s,
Definitely would have been. Yeah.
that was my childhood.
It would have been normal back then. And I think too, you have to keep in mind like the percentage of time that would happen. If that's once a year, once every couple of years, that's a lot different than we see with these serial killers who were abused every day.
Right.
And had head injuries and all kinds of other things. So yeah, everyone's got some rough times. That just kind of seems what's happening here.
And I think it's important to note that even if it was only a couple of times a year, the impact that it could have had on Jodi could have been much more than we might think.
She could have been sensitive to it.
Been very, very sensitive, especially after at 6 years old, clocking your brother in the head and then having somebody sit down and say that could have really hurt him. Like that can be a traumatic event in someone's life.
Yeah, so this kind of becomes the story, right? We don't exactly know, but Jodi represented it as a rough childhood. That's her position in this. Now, the family moved to Santa Maria, California when Jodi was 11. She seemed to adjust well. She did okay in school. She had an interest in art. When she was 15 years old, her mother caught her trying to grow marijuana in a piece of Tupperware.
What's interesting about that move is Jodi's own diaries and her journals, because she started journaling in middle school, and that would actually become really important later in the trial. Her own journals talk about it being a very difficult time for her to adjust. I mean, ultimately, I think she did, but initially, like when she went to high school, it was really tough for her because as she said, all of the people who went to that high school had gone through 15 years of school together. They knew each other. And trying to break into those cliques, as she put it in one of her diary entries, was really difficult. And so she felt like ostracized. Like she felt she was outside of things. And I think that was really difficult for her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you could look at this and say, well, she started documenting that at a young, that age. Like those were contemporaneous, right? So she was recording those as it was happening. That lends a lot of credence to her testimony on that issue. Mm-hmm. If she's recording it in the moment and she's saying, I had trouble adjusting. But again, trouble adjusting in school is different than what we see with other killers. So far, there's really nothing to indicate she's going to become a killer or even a criminal of any type, except for the incident 15 where she was growing marijuana.
It makes me wonder, at that point, which one came first? Did her perception of these events being difficult cause her to then, have these patterns of unstable relationships and, just, I guess, general difficulties in that area? Or was that something that was kind of already brewing in her and the situation wasn't all that difficult, but because of how she was already reacting mentally and internally, maybe the situation was perceived to her as difficult because of, personality, if you will. So I'm curious which one came first. Of course, we'll never know, and it'd be tough to figure that out anyway. But which one came first, or what was she actually thinking about these things? Murder much later, before she did it, or not? There's a lot of questions come up throughout this case.
I do tend to think that some of her perception of her relationship with her mother formed before that. She and her mother had a very tumultuous relationship. The testimony, even by the psychologist, talked about how there were times when Jodi would just, become very violent towards her mother. Not as much corroboration about her mother being violent towards her, but definitely some times where Jodi just started hitting her mother for, no reason. And then later on, I think that it was colored more by the events that would happen with the marijuana. Like, her parents reacted to that very strictly, as I think parent probably should, given that it could be a federal felony.
They called the police.
Yeah.
Which is highly unusual. I mean, that kind of supports the idea they were strict. Yeah.
Or they didn't know what else to do.
Yeah, I mean, that just seems, for one offense, I mean, marijuana and Tupperware is far from starring in the series Weeds or anything, right? I mean, I think that's one of those things where you dump it out and just say, don't do it anymore. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess it depends on what else she did and, how strict they are. But again, in the 80s, marijuana was vilified. Now it's like a hero. So it's a much different drug in terms of the way it's interpreted.
Would have been 95, I think, at that point.
Oh, right.
15.
Yeah. Well, still, it was bad. In the 90s, marijuana.
In the 90s, in the 90s, it was still not a great thing. And I think that depends on the parent, whether they would call the police or not. I'd like to say that as a parent, I would in that situation. Just maybe not press charges, but at least bring a police officer in and be like, this is how serious this particular thing is. Because I've worked with plenty of people who had substance use issues who at 15 were doing these things their parents found out and just swept it under the rug. And that kind of contributed to their continued use.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings on the police, especially after, so many cases, even ones that we've covered here, like Michael Morton. I feel like, I don't know. I think the police, many of them are well-intentioned, but they are armed agents of the state. And that's just something that always kind of replays in my mind that, we have an adversarial criminal justice system and you don't want to give comfort to the enemy. You don't want to invite the enemy in and say, look, scrutinize me and send me to prison. So I guess, I mean, I'm a little torn on inviting them in. I feel like the police almost always make things worse for minor crimes. But you have a good point. What if the minor crimes lead up to a more serious crime? Then you could have prevented it. Clearly, if she was, constructing a bomb, you have to call the authorities.
Right.
But a little bit of marijuana, even in '95, I don't know. I'm kind of torn on that.
What if it was being planted in a real nice planter? Would that change? Was it the Tupperware that did
Is it stylish?
It's like it's the Tupperware. If it's in the Tupperware, just toss it out, or pretend to toss it out. Keep it for yourself for later. But then
put the Tupperware lid on it.
Yeah, but if it's in a really good planter and it's out in the backyard and you got several buds coming off of it, that's when it's time to call the cops, right? It's a matter of how much.
Well, I would hope that the way the police would react in a situation like that is how they did in this case, which was to give her a stern talking to. So, and again, I think most officers are good. They probably would do that. I've been in situations before where I was hospitalizing people for like psychosis and other conditions, and they had all kinds of drugs on them, and Delaware State Police came out and just dumped out marijuana everything. Just dumped it out in the trash. Sometimes they put it in their car. I'm sure they were going to throw it away somewhere. But they're like, you don't need more problems. And just,
They were going to dispose of it.
I'll take care of this later. Me and you have a date.
It's like, I know that the Delaware State Police do have the Hero Hope program. So if people, come into any police barracks and say, I want help, get me into a rehab, it doesn't matter whether they have anything on them. They're not going to face criminal charges for possession. It could be heroin, and then they're still going to be like, okay, we'll get you to a rehab. We'll get you in. It's fine. And I agree. In general, I think that most police want to, but without getting too into the political side of things, I think that there is a systemic issue. I think that if Jodi Arias had been from a lower socioeconomic area and had been a minority, she would have been locked up immediately. But she was middle class. She was white. The police officer was, I don't know whether the police officer was white or not, but it's entirely likely in a small town, Wairika, that it was a white cop who kind of was like, oh, this is a 15-year-old girl. I don't want to send her to prison.
Yeah, and the fact the parents called probably made the police a little more generous to Jodi as well. Like, if they catch you running down the street with marijuana, that's different than your parents calling and inviting people in. See, I would think maybe the way to go would be to call an attorney. I guess I always think that way. Like, you see the situation now, attorneys are expensive, but call an attorney and say, my kid's growing marijuana in Tupperware. What do I do?
Just make sure it's not a planter.
Bring it over to the office right away. All right. So, or a mental health counselor could handle that too, obviously.
Yeah.
I think actually that's probably the best way. It doesn't help with the legal side necessarily, but in terms of it growing into a problem, in terms of like mental health.
Growing into a problem. That was good.
Pun intended.
So what would you hope that the lawyer would do? Like to give some kind of advice on it or something?
Yeah, I mean, they could broker some type of immunity or, I mean, really, I mean, I don't know if the police need, I'm not sold on the idea the police need to be involved in this kind of Mickey Mouse offense. But again, mid-90s, much more serious. Now, if she was growing, like if it was the whole backyard, it's like, she was distributing to different countries. Yeah, okay.
They suddenly find she's got a whole farm on the back 40 somewhere. It's like, you've been growing what?
She's hiding like a Bentley and a Rolls back there.
But apparently this particular incident became a major point in her life and her relationship with them. It really soured their relationship for a very long time.
Yeah, it does seem like after this, things did get kind of strict, at least in terms of monitoring. They would routinely search her room. They had a curfew of 6 p.m. on Jodi. She started to become, she described, paranoid and increasingly distant from her parents, kind of viewing them as the enemy to her freedom.
And if I'm not mistaken, I believe she moved out like at 17.
Right.
2 years later.
Yeah, she got a boyfriend and she moved out in with the boyfriend at age 17. She didn't even wait till 18. She was just like, I'm out.
And never finished high school because of that. So she was pretty anxious to leave their house. And you bring up a good point. Maybe it was the marijuana growing that kind of set that in motion and contributed to that mindset of, they're strict, they sent police over to talk to me about it, and the curfew, searching my room. So that seems to have set a course of events in place 2 years later would contribute to her moving out.
Yeah, she certainly interpreted the relationship as not healthy. Now, around the same time, the 15, 16, 17, approaching moving out, she discovered boys. And she was very interested in boys. Her relationships in the early years and really through her whole life were characterized as erratic. There was dramatic breakups and reconciliations. So high energy, high drama. Her parents sent her to Costa Rica in the 10th grade. So we're here before she moved out. Part of a cultural exchange. When she was there, she started dating a 16-year-old son of the host family. So again, kind of like not looking too far, just whatever's right in front of her, she's interested in. She said that she was not in love, but she still had a good feeling about him. When she returned to the United States, the boyfriend stayed in touch. Jodi said she would move there and they could start a family. It didn't work out when he became possessive. Again, Jodi's description, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm. I didn't get, in reading about that, I didn't get any indication about what the parents thought that exchange program would do for Jodi. My impression would be that maybe she needs to experience something different, be with different people, have different experiences in general that might help her understand herself better, might help her understand the world better, a sense of responsibility maybe. Did you guys have any different impression, or do you hear anything different?
Yeah, I didn't see anything about the reasons for that, other than maybe an educational component.
I find that pretty curious.
Yeah, I think it was an educational thing. I was involved in an exchange program when I was in sixth grade with a family in France, and it was just an educational thing. It was really wonderful experience. I got to spend some time in France, and we had an exchange student come stay with us, and we got to see aspects of different culture. And I think maybe it was trying to get her out of that, out of town for a little while, at least for a couple of weeks. The best way they can give her a nice vacation, I guess, but also including an aspect of education.
Yeah, I got to do one as well in Tanzania in college, and so it was great, like you described. But I find this one curious because she had bad behavior, increasingly so, and so I'm curious if the parents thought that this would cure her in some way. Maybe that's not what they were actually thinking, but maybe it was some kind of a subconscious or unconscious, maybe this will cure her, help her, something like that. It didn't work, I don't think, but maybe maybe she saw some kind of benefit from it.
Yeah, it could have been they just reshuffle the deck, send her out there and hope that it magically works out. Again, mental health counseling probably would have been the better route when things are off the rails, but
probably just as expensive as sending her to Costa Rica to do regular counseling for a while. But
well, we are talking about California too, the home of strategic family therapy, right? So the strategic therapists say just change anything, and the systems theorists just change anything, and maybe things will work out for the best. So maybe they were inspired by it.
It also may have been a case of trying to reward Jodi for something.
That's a good point.
If she'd been doing well, they hadn't found anything in her bedroom for 6 months. So it was like, okay, well we'll consider it. We'll do this and reward her, and then try and bring it back up. But again, I haven't read anything about that, so that's just my supposition about what might have been.
All we can do is speculate.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it seems like an unusual move, so I think it is of interest. With the timing. So as you mentioned, Jeff, she moves out. She's working as a waitress. She dropped out of high school, never returned for her senior year of high school. And she catches her boyfriend cheating. In 1999, the boyfriend moved to Medford, Oregon, and Jodi moved in with a friend. And we see this kind of murky relationship status. They were still together in a way. It's like a distance relationship. She would swing by the residence in Oregon. Again, this is an entirely different state. Right, and anonymously leave groceries on his doorstep. That's unusual. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't think of a single time I've left groceries on anyone's doorstep.
What do you do with the frozen items?
Hope that they get to him in time.
Yeah. I mean, are they like? How does she know what he needs? I don't know.
Maybe it's just produce, and hope that he's not in Costa Rica for a week.
Well, maybe that was the point. Maybe she thought that he needed certain things, and that was kind of the message. Like, I know what's best for you. I can provide, in a way that maybe you can't. Like knowing what kind of food you need to eat, what's best for you, or something like that. Who knows?
That, or she was breaking into his house and looking through his refrigerator and cabinets.
Quite possible.
And taking note of what's not there.
Quite possible.
Taking an inventory, yeah. So eventually she moved to Medford to be closer to him, but she didn't live with him. She actually moved in with somebody else in an apartment. So we see now two love interests maintained at the same time, sort of. She would still leave items on the doorstep, even with the new boyfriend being in the picture. Yeah. When I first worked on this, like this outline, I didn't know what to make of this. The whole leaving things when you're already in another romantic relationship. Usually people, even if they have, say, borderline features, which has been suggested in the case of Jodi Arias, not necessarily the disorder, but the personality features. Usually when there's a new love interest, the person completely moves on. I would say even like more so, like they totally latch on to the new person. And they don't continue to stalk or harass the old love interest. So this doesn't really fit in.
It doesn't really fit in with borderline. And like, I'm not diagnosing anyone because I haven't spent any time with Jodi Arias. I can't sit and say, hey, I've been there. I can't diagnose. So I can only suppose, but that's the kind of thing that sounds much more in line with histrionic. The considering a relationship to be much more intimate than it really is, and trying to maintain that connection. She's already at this point in her life demonstrated that she can be uncomfortable when she's not the center of attention, right? And enjoying using seduction, provocative behaviors to get that attention whenever she can.
Yeah, and she was certainly, or I think her behaviors align with impressionistic speech as well. You know, she kind of represented herself to be an expert and have a lot of deep knowledge, but she was very shallow.
And then the huge dramatic breakups and then reconciliations and things like that. And one of the other things that I saw was exactly how shallow she was. In one of her diary entries, she did a gratitude list, right? And this is something I tell my clients to do, especially at night before you go to bed. Do a gratitude list, things you are grateful for having in your life. The things on her list were incredibly shallow. The 5 things she had on her list: babies, not her baby, just babies in general.
Just the fact that babies exist.
Just the fact that I'm just thankful for babies. Just that they exist. Not, I'm looking forward to having one myself someday, or I want to have one. It was, I'm grateful for babies. I'm grateful for pizza. That was number 2. I'm grateful for the shape of my body. Grateful for my hair. And I'm grateful for Travis Alexander.
That comes, yeah.
That would come later. But yeah, those four of those 5 things are incredibly shallow.
Well, pizza's on the same list as her boyfriend, so
and higher up on that list too, by the way, by quite a bit. It's right under babies.
So what we see, we talked about this in the Gerhardt's writer video, I think, about the dimensional model of personality versus the categorical model. So borderline personality disorder is in the same cluster. The dramatic erratic cluster, cluster B, is antisocial, narcissistic, histrionic. And more times than not, if you are dealing with somebody that has one of those disorders, they're going to have a few symptoms of each of those disorders, like 1 or 2. Histrionic and borderline often run together. And we see that narcissistic and borderline, some overlap, such as the vulnerable narcissistic traits. Antisocial and narcissistic, often, a lot of overlap. So I think this is a great example of how, again, there was all kinds of mixed testimony about what she may or may not have had. But if you're looking at personality pathology and you really want to understand what's going on, it's more helpful to look at the symptoms, regardless of whether somebody is officially diagnosed or not. Look at the symptoms, and it gives you a kind of a more nuanced picture of what that personality structure looks like. And here, we do see a lot of histrionic, we see some borderline, we see some antisocial later on, and narcissism. Quite a bit of narcissism at several different stages. So at this point, we see that the new boyfriend, the new relationship, that ends as well. And Jodi moves to Big Sur, California. So Big Sur, S-U-R, is that how you pronounce that?
I believe so.
Big Sur. She took a job in a resort as a waitress. She felt an attraction for her boss. He was about 20 years older. So again, we're near the cluster B features again. We're kind of keep journeying back to cluster B. The massive age difference, especially when the person's young, is usually an indicator of boundary problems.
And she was 22 at the time, I think, maybe 21, maybe when
she was 22 and he was 42. Yeah. Age difference relationships can work out, but when you see like the 20s and the 40s or the 20s and the 50s, that a good portion of the time that points to some type of boundary issue. Not always. I've seen those relationships work out too. Doesn't some Hollywood people have really young?
Oh yeah,
like Jeff Goldblum, I think Mel Gibson. There's a few others. Like I'm talking massive like 40 year, 35 year.
The I can't think of his name right now, but the front man for the Rolling Stones. I think there's a massive difference between him and his wife, and he's in his I don't know, 60s or 70s or so, and has recently had kids, and just speaks to that age difference. So yes, I think it runs pretty rampant with celebrities.
Yeah, they. We talked about Betty Broderick in that case. That this trade-in mentality.
Oh yeah,
Wealthy celebrities trade in several times. There's a much smaller acceptable window for their romantic interest, like 22 to 32 ish.
That's the acceptable age range for most of Hollywood in general.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you got to be a really great actress to manage to make it past 32 or so.
Oh, absolutely.
Before you can be Meryl Streep can be.
I was going to say Meryl Streep. Yeah,
can do wonders. Dame Judi Dench can do no wrong. Like in anything, I think she's one of the most wonderful actresses in the world. But you got to really work hard to build a reputation, so that when you get past 32 or 35, Hollywood still sees you as a viable property, not in ownership, but in being able to make money.
Right, and in box office receipts, right? I mean, that's what they look at. Yeah, Meryl Streep, Sally Field. There's definitely exceptions, but not that many. It's very challenging to stay employed past early 30s.
It's very disturbing that that's the trend, though.
Yeah. Well, Hollywood is very, very shallow.
Yes.
Yeah. Even in their best moments, they're shallow. Like there's very little redeeming about the mentality that leads to the movies that we love. That's the truth, right? Like we love them, like the movies are great, but there's a dark side to how they get there.
The global conglomerate of Hollywood would definitely have histrionic personality disorder.
I think Jodi would have fit right in with that. And there was somebody that even said that the best screenwriters couldn't have come up with this whole thing, with what Jodi said, how she thought, how she came up with these ideas. And yeah, I'm coming up with all this stuff in her mind just right off the bat, and playing the part as well, kind of looking the part, looking like she genuinely believed what she was saying, and then later retracting it and coming up with other stories. She'd probably fit right in Hollywood and be able to act real well and write a lot of, like really out there things. So that supports your point.
Yeah, I don't remember in her story that she ever had an interest in the Hollywood actress route. But you're right. I mean, she seems like a very good fit in a lot of ways for that.
I think she could have gone real far in Hollywood.
Yeah, I mean, it's not unusual she, again, 22, for somebody like that interested in acting to date older, like directors and producers. Again, it's a bizarre business. But I don't think she did any of that. I think her interests were very much like what's in front of her right now. She goes to Costa Rica, the kid who lives in the house, right? She goes to this resort, the boss. Like, she's not really thinking harder.
Focused on relationships that are right in front of her, and not really much else. Certainly not finishing high school.
Put cannabis right in front of her. She's
right.
I mean, she did write about how much she enjoyed it in her journal.
Yeah, that was probably one of her first loves, was cannabis, yeah. Which, again, for the time wouldn't be unusual. Probably even more so now we see it. So this couple would buy a $350,000 house together in 2005 in Palm Desert, California. That's a lot of money. That's about 16 years ago. That was a lot. It's a lot of money now for a house, but it was it's quite a bit then. And quickly they found themselves in financial trouble. And Jodi did what many people do when they're in a financial pickle. They turn to multi-level marketing.
Mm-hmm. Trying to get that quick cash.
That quick cash that you could have had a piece of.
Could have been there. Could have been just rolling in the money right now. With lots and lots of people making money for me, I didn't make it.
Just build those layers of the pyramid.
Build those layers.
Unfortunately, you had to become a counselor instead.
I can't rely on anybody else's income to feed mine.
Mm-hmm.
It's terrible. It's just terrible. I mean, talk about no fulfillment, right? Jeez.
It's a sad tale. Sad tale.
Yeah, it's like a hamster on a wheel.
Yeah.
Right? Just paid by the hour, paid by the transaction, Nobody's sending cash up the line. What do they call it? Upline,
Probably,
downline, or
probably.
something. Yeah. I know Amway was for a long time. Amway was the huge multi-level marketing, and they have strenuously objected to being characterized as anything like a pyramid scheme. But it's easy to see a resemblance.
It's more of a triangular, not a scheme, a triangular plan of income disbursement up and down.
Yeah, it's a pyramid plan.
It's a plan, not a scheme. At this point, the housing market kind of burst underneath them. Like they bought this house and had the mortgage and everything was going fine, but then the housing market burst and their loans shot up by like $500-600 a month, and they just weren't making the money. And from what I read in one of the transcripts, Jodi didn't jump right into the multi-level marketing scheme business
Plan.
The plan. She didn't jump right into that. She was told about it by a friend. Thought it was interesting, but kind of put the pamphlet and DVD he gave her off to the side, and then she was cleaning up. A couple months later, decided to watch the DVD. Decided she was interested, so she called that guy up and said, "Hey, I'm interested." And he's like, "Oh, I don't do that anymore." But here's the number of the guy who got me involved in it. Maybe you can call him. So she called that guy, and he's like, "I don't do that anymore." So she ended up having to do her own research and contact the company directly. But she ultimately ended up becoming involved in prepaid legal services.
Yep. So prepaid legal, I think they might have been the first one to do this, but there's competitors out there for them as well now who are also multi-level marketing endeavors. But prepaid legal is this basically legal insurance. All right. So this is a peculiar product. So they go to people. Well, obviously they recruit because it's multi-level marketing, but they go to consumers and they say, "Are you worried about being sued? If you needed a lawyer, you could spend $10,000 in a few years or a few months. You need insurance for this risk of being sued that you probably don't have, but now you're thinking about." And you pay this monthly fee, and in theory, there's this law firm they connect you with that will give you so many hours, basically, and take care of certain things. Like they might do a will as part of that. They might do something else as part of that. I'm sure they're nice people, but it's a tough model to see. Yeah, I don't really see the value for consumers. Honestly, I don't see it. Certain insurances make sense: car insurance, life insurance, homeowners insurance. How many regular people get sued?
And not a lot. I can see in certain instances where a person has had that experience already and they work in an industry that is likely to result in lawsuits, bail bonds, that kind of thing.
Right. Bounty hunters.
Bounty hunters. Like that'd be great for bounty hunters. Like, okay. But a lot of them also know attorneys personally would be able to help them out. But
I look at this as an issue as that other insurance would take care of. Right, that's the part that always confused me about prepaid legal was, if you are in a bail bondsman or you drive a truck or you clean buildings or whatever, you're going to have insurance. Mm-hmm. Your liability is probably going to be restricted to whatever you do for a living. It doesn't have to be, but
we as professional counselors have to have liability insurance in order to maintain our licensure. So we've got that insurance. If somebody sues, my insurance should take care of that.
Yeah. So what would be prepaid legal? Would be like an umbrella policy, like a backup to, I don't know.
It's like, well, your liability insurance doesn't cover the lawyer fees or representing you in court. That's going to be the settlement, and then you're going to have to accept the settlement is against you in that court. We get prepaid legal and help you get that lawyer to fight for you, and you don't have to pay out of pocket for it. And if you believe that, I've got a rock that will keep tigers out of your yard, like completely, and forever. Like you have to pay rent on the rock, but you will never have a tiger in your yard ever, guarantee it.
Well, yeah, I mean they have to be persuasive like that and try to get people to believe that there really is a need for what they're selling, and oftentimes play off of some kind of fear, like you don't have enough to cover whatever you need, which maybe in some cases may be true, but at the same time, they've got a product that they're trying to sell, and it benefits them when they sell it. So, it seems kind of like it could potentially seem devious, that they might be doing something like that. And it might not be the full truth. They might not actually know, somebody that's selling something like that might not actually know when this could come into play, but just that I want to sell this, I want to make money, so let me say whatever I can so that they'll buy it.
Yeah, the law is also very specific. Like there's disciplines in the law. So to be paired up with one law firm never made sense to me either. Like what if you need a real estate attorney or a tax attorney or criminal defense attorney?
I'll sell you insurance for that.
Yeah, like, what lawyer, no lawyer does all three of those things. I mean, I've never heard of that.
Well, that comes to us. Like we're prepaid legal. You pay us, and then if you need the lawyer, we'll put you with a lawyer when you need it. We'll get the right one for you at that time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a weird system. And imagine the fees too, right? Like I think the fees, I forget what they are, but I don't know the number, but let's just say it's $20 to $50 a month, right? The consumers they're targeting are in the middle class. And I think it would be a tough sell, to say $700 a month or something. You're in that sweet spot's going to be like 20 to 50, something like that. Lawyers are $450 to $650 an hour. Are they really going to be like, oh yeah, they get approached by prepaid legal. Oh yeah, I like this. Give me my cut of this $20 and I'll represent your people. No problem. Have them come in anytime. They can come by my house. Here's my cell phone number. I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah. No, and I think what the lawyer or the attorneys charge is way north of what a counselor can charge. Like and medical insurance will cover, most of the expense depending on the insurance, depending on the deductible, things like that. So that there's very little out of pocket from the client. But what I get it from an insurance company is way less than $450 an hour. Like way less than
closer
that.
to the 20 to 50. Yeah. Yeah. So, I think that it's reasonable to believe that what potentially could be going on with a place like prepaid legal is that the money for the people in it comes from recruiting layers beneath you, right? The pyramid plan.
The triangular shaped money distribution plan.
That's right. The pyramid angle. So anyway, she did believe this could lead to financial freedom, and she went to a convention. Turns out this will be a fateful decision. A convention for prepaid legal in Las Vegas, Nevada, September of 2006, and there she met a man who becomes pretty important to the story, I would say.
I'd say pivotal to this particular story.
Without it really wouldn't happen.
Right.
And this is Travis Alexander. Now, Travis Alexander was a prepaid legal hero. He was a young guy, but very well respected in that triangular angle thing. And he lived in Arizona. He was about 3 years older than Jodi. He was also a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which I'm just going to call LDS to prevent having to say that.
That's often what they call themselves.
Yeah. So this isn't particularly uncommon. It was in Arizona. It's not uncommon. Utah is the state you usually think of as the highest concentration for that particular religious belief system.
Well, Utah's where Brigham Young University is. It's where the highest concentration of Mormons gathered way back when Brigham Young was actually leading them west and settled there during the building of the Transcontinental Railroad.
Yeah, so they have a long history in that area. And in terms of like the mentality of LDS, they tend to be somewhat strict, right? They have strict rules. And the only reason I bring this up is because we're going to get into some sex issues. I want to give that some context. So LDS practitioners, members, whatever they're called, Mormons, I guess is one name, not big fans of sex out of marriage.
They have a covenant. They have a law amongst their group saying no premarital sex.
Yes, that's pretty strict. Yeah. So this is what he was into. Right? This was his belief system. These two liked each other right away. Travis would tell his friends that Jodi could be the one.
And he had been looking for somebody to marry at that point.
Right.
Marriage material is a phrase that was thrown around. I don't know if he said that or not, but he definitely had it on his mind. I want to marry somebody. I want to marry somebody who's Mormon, and I want to marry somebody who has a similar religious belief as I do, and how seriously he took it. He wanted them to match up with that as well.
So this brings me to another point. I'm glad you mentioned that, with LDS specifically. And I've read this in other cases and in this case, and I find this interesting. To them, for a single Mormon, 30, which I think Travis was approaching at this time, 30 is a big, that's a big number for them, because they have some sort of system, as I understand it, where you get introduced, as a man, you get introduced to young women who are in the LDS faith system. And when you turn 30, you don't anymore. It's greatly restricted, which seems odd because that's not old by any measure at all. But to them, that's like an old man. And he was very worried because he had been rejected quite a few times before. He had no luck with women. So he was kind of hungry to find a marital partner, and he was interested in Jodi.
I wouldn't necessarily say Travis had no luck with women. He dated quite a bit, but he didn't have anyone that he or they found that connection enough to want to settle down and marry.
Right. It was the commitment.
Yeah. It was the commitment part of it. But he definitely had a number of different female companions that he spent time with.
Even after he met Jodi. Yeah.
That's surprising that you say that, Mike, because I'm curious, and I don't know the answer to this, but I'm curious if if most of the guys in the LDS faith had that similar mindset of, prior to 30 or approaching 30, that I really got to make sure that I'm trying to find this relationship, or I'm going to marry this woman. And I wonder too then if women had a similar thought process. They meet a guy and they're kind of maybe wondering about his age, or maybe even concerned. So I'm curious if it went both ways, and I'm curious how many other people had a similar thing like that. I'm sure there's people watching that are at the very least familiar with the Mormon faith that might be able to shed a little bit of light on that. But it makes me think that maybe it wasn't uncommon. Travis's thought process maybe wasn't that uncommon.
Yeah. It just seems it's one of those things where I guess if you live it, it makes sense. It becomes normal. But from an outsider perspective, 30 seems very arbitrary and young to be worried about not finding somebody that you'd be married to for 40 or 50 years. Seems like it's borrowing worry. But if the structure doesn't introduce you to people, then... Yeah.
I'm not sure how long that particular standard's been in place, but if it was one of those that was set by Brigham Young, that was at a time period where 30 wasn't actually that young.
Right.
It would have been, lots of disease and natural causes could kill somebody by age 45. So it wasn't necessarily that young of an age.
Maybe it's more tradition to an earlier time.
It's entirely possible.
Yeah.
You can see a similar thing, maybe definitely not that I know of, a spoken or written rule, but you could say the same thing about the Christian faith, in that there's a big emphasis put on, by some people, certainly not by all people, but finding the right person. And oftentimes Christian universities, there's a running joke with many people that sometimes women would go for an MRS degree. They would go there kind of with the thought of, I'm going to find the person I'm going to marry, as opposed to I'm going to go get an education. So there's definitely a similar thought process there of, I'm going to be looking for the person I'm going to marry. And you probably see that in a lot of other religions. And probably just because it's a centralized group of people. I'm sure that happens with people that aren't involved with the church as well, thinking, I want to find somebody that I'm going to marry. But since you're in a group of like-minded people, that thought, of course, is going to come up. I'm going to find somebody that I like, that I want to marry, and so forth. And that idea probably grows as people talk to each other, and probably just has more to do with group mentality than anything else, if I had to guess.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. And wherever it comes from, or however normal or not normal it was on his mind. Now, during this time, though, Jodi, at this convention, she had a boyfriend. Mm-hmm. And she told Travis it's never going to happen. And then right before she left, she gave him her phone number.
But she gave him her phone number not just right before she left. Like she gave it to him, like the next day. She'd given it to him.
Oh, was that soon?
Yeah, it was like they met on a Thursday. The convention technically started Thursday evening, and then Friday evening there was a maybe it was Wednesday, or, but there was an executive's executive brunch
where she dressed up and
she got a dress, but she was asked like there was the day after they met. Travis had asked her, I think that was Thursday was when that dinner was, but Travis had called her friend Michelle, who he knew, and she was there with, and asked Michelle to ask Jodi to go with him to this dinner because he could bring a +1.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, I don't have a dress, no. But then they went up to like Kohl's or something and tried to find a dress, and eventually one of Travis's best friend's wife had a dress that she brought an extra, and she said that Jodi could use it. And it was during that whole thing where Jodi kind of gave her number to Travis so they could coordinate going to this dinner. And then like she ended up spending most of the rest of the weekend with him, mm-hmm. just talking. Like he invited her to come down to like sit ringside to some of the speeches and things in the big central hall. It was like the stadium seating kind of thing. And she and Michelle had seats like way up in the nosebleeds. She got a text from Travis saying like, "Hey, come on down here." And she sat next to him like ringside, right next to the stages.
Yeah. I think there was a photo taken at that time, right? It was one of the images I saw was of her dressed up and him like in maybe a tuxedo or maybe a shirt and tie. I don't remember. He was dressed up.
Right.
Yeah. So they had had an interesting experience at the convention. And then we see that Travis invites her to spend the weekend with him at a friend's house in California. This becomes important to the narrative. And Jodi accepts the invitation, then breaks up with her current boyfriend. So what a committed relationship that must have been.
Yeah.
Boyfriend of 4 years. They'd bought a house together. She had moved with him, obviously. So that gives the impression to me that like you implied, she wasn't really too committed to that relationship, but maybe she was, and maybe it was just that easy of a switch for her to be like, I found something much better, and I'm able to just cut ties with this and just move right on.
Well, she said she was never going to cheat on a boyfriend, so she was honest with him and broke up with him. Says it's not going to go anywhere, but then continued to live with him, and she went to this party in California.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is, again, where we see this divergence into the world of what could be Jodi Arias fiction. We don't know. Everything that she says at this point is hotly contested by witnesses. Sometimes they have contradictory reports about how she did or didn't do things, so it's hard to know. But Jodi said that at that house, or wherever that was, she had oral sex with Travis, but didn't really feel romantically connected to him. Didn't see it really going anywhere.
Yeah. She said that when she first got there, Travis wasn't there. And he showed up a while later. In her testimony in court, this was one of the things that really struck me as very, very much part of that histrionic type of things. One is she said when Travis came in, he said hi to everybody. He just kind of looked at her, winked, and then went about talking to everybody else and didn't actually talk to her again for like an hour. And she felt really slighted by that. Like she wasn't the center of his attention. So she got kind of agitated, a little bit upset. And it wasn't until most of the other people had left and they sat down to watch a video that he had made a few years earlier, some comedic video that she actually got a chance to talk to him. And she felt better about it after that.
Yeah, so with the distance, she's upset. And then with the communication, she kind of forgets the bad times there and feels comfortable.
She's drawn right back into what feeds her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it appears as though, to Jodi anyway, that Travis really was interested in her becoming interested in LDS. So he introduces this, not so subtly, pretty early on. The weekend ended, they went back to their respective homes, but they stayed in touch long distance. A lot of phone and text messages.
A lot.
Later, we find out that it was literally tens of thousands of text messages.
And emails. Did I hear correctly? Something like, I might be getting this wrong. I want to say like 80,000 emails.
I think that's what
Am I
it
correct
was,
on
yeah.
that? It sounds so ridiculous to say it, but I think that's what it was.
But it was a huge amount.
Yeah.
It was a huge amount. Now, the next time they would see each other in person would be when Travis wanted to give her a copy of the LDS Bible. Like, wanted to give her instruction and try and talk to her about converting into LDS. And then he would contact the LDS churches local to her and get her set up with missionaries so that she could learn more. And this is where that kind of another histrionic thing, the suggestibility.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she embraced that from the get-go. From the moment he was like, hey, would you be interested in converting to LDS? She's like, yes. Like, immediately, just like, anything you want, I'll do it.
Yeah, so focused on that relationship and not really looking at the big picture, right? I mean, just everything else is a technicality, a formality. She's just hyper focused.
Jodi had grown up, if I'm not mistaken, Jodi had grown up with some kind of Christian influence.
Non-denominational.
Non-denominational. And then I think it was during the period where she had moved out of her parents' house, she started to become very interested in, and I might not be using the correct phrase that she would have used, but the second coming of Christ, the rapture maybe. I may not be getting the details
If
right.
I'm not mistaken, she thought that it was going to happen in September of 1997. And she was very sure of that. And she told a lot of people,
Yeah.
basically, get your house in order because this is happening. Turns out it didn't happen.
Spoiler alert.
Yes.
Spoiler alert.
For 24 years ago.
24 years ago, the rapture didn't happen.
Well, now we know.
Yeah, so she had a big commitment to that. That was a big part of her life, was the end of the world. The apocalypse was a big deal.
So then for her to just, I'm interested now in Mormonism and I'm going to go for it. I wonder, I don't have any answers for this either, but I wonder if she thought that this would help something for her personally, kind of fulfill something for her. But I'm sure that at the very least she thought that it would help the relationship with Travis. And, I can really get in with him. He'll really like me a lot more. More of my desires will be fulfilled because he likes me more, because I'm in the church and so forth. And that this would really cement the relationship for her.
But before they left from that particular meeting where he gave her this book, apparently, according to Jodi, he then, they went to a park and sat in her car for a little while, and he asked her for oral sex at that point. And she obliged, said it didn't feel as weird the second time because she was more into it, and then it just kind of snowballed from there with all of the texting and the communication. And they would then have, meetings at a midpoint between their two homes.
Right. Yeah, so I guess the oral sex component was because, and I think LDS probably wouldn't be happy with this, but I think the thinking was that if it's not vaginal intercourse, then it's okay.
That's exactly Travis's point. Like, if it's not vaginal, then it doesn't count as sex. And he's working with lawyers at this point, so he was kind of legalizing the whole thing. Like I'm not breaking, I'm just bending it a little bit. Just bending it. If it's oral, if it's the other side, if it's anal, it's not. If it's not vaginal, it doesn't count. As there's no chance of children coming out from it. So, which just is, it's excusatory to me.
Yeah, he was looking for a technicality that was not there in this case, but Jodi would not have known that. I don't know how well she really understood LDS.
And with some of the suggestibility, even though she was learning more from the missionaries and she was learning more from going to the church, she trusted Travis at that point. Like, if he told her, "Oh yeah, that's a loophole," like this is we can't do this, but the other things we're perfectly fine with, she would have trusted that.
Or at the very least, she just wanted sex too, and was like, maybe she even knew that was kind of frowned upon in the church, but was kind of like, oh, well, I want sex too, so...
Well, if he's willing.
Exactly, yeah. Which, I mean, you could say that with the religious and non-religious, that kind of theme of, I don't want to do this, but somebody else does. Okay, I'll bend my own rules. I'll bend my own morals on that.
Does the LDS have an apocalypse? Is that a selling point?
I'm not familiar enough.
I don't know if they do or not. But I'm wondering, like, if she's reading the brochure or whatever, she's like, "Oh, apocalypse."
Now, if Sam was here, we could ask.
That's right.
Ask him to look it up. Unfortunately.
So moving forward to November of 2006, we see that Jodi was baptized into LDS. So she joins, and she was baptized by Travis Alexander. Now, once again, we see a claim that for which Jodi is the only witness, that she and Travis had anal sex at this point. Mm-hmm. So right after the ceremony. So as Christmas approached, we see that Jodi showed up uninvited at a business event that Travis was hosting at his house in Arizona. And here we see, I think, the first good opportunity for a number of Travis's friends to see and interact with Jodi. And they described her as creepy. Yeah. Would not have expected that based on what we saw so far.
I'm going to interrupt for a second and just answer prior question. I just looked up, all I searched for was LDS rapture. And the first few things that come up, it seems to be very similar to what the Christian church believes in the rapture of those who have faith in Christ will be raptured, and those who do not, it appears that they will not be. So it seems to be very much the similar doctrine. I'm sure that there are differences. I'm sure that different people believe different things, but that's what comes up as first on here. So
is there a date?
I don't think so.
That seems Jodi seems very interested in a definitive date.
Yeah, Jodi seemed very much to want to have a definitive date for that rapture.
Yeah,
as far as I know.
So if they could have given her,
it didn't happen in 2012 either.
Right.
Spoiler alert.
That's right. So if they had offered her a date, she might have joined a little sooner.
She might have.
Yeah.
The something that pops up here is Bible.ca, and then so there was somebody that believed that the year 2000 was a possible date for the end. So I think this comes from a guy by the name of John Darby. I'm not sure how popular he was there, but the next one is Rapture Calendar. So you know what? I think at this point, it just let's think every day is going to be it.
I think people have been trying to calculate the actual date of the end of the world for. I think that's what Stonehenge was designed for, figuring out when the end of the world was going to happen. I have no proof of that, but it's timekeeping and the ends of things seems to be something that a lot of people are very interested in. Jodi clearly was interested at one point in her life in the rapture, but she had joined LDS and had apparently at that point they were like she and Travis were actually dating. Mm-hmm. Like they were. It wasn't an under wraps kind of thing. Like she was now baptized and into LDS, and they were dating. And this particular time when Travis's friends were able to finally really interact with her, she did not come off well to them.
No, and this might have stuck with him for a bit. So in February 2007, they officially become a couple. They're 300 miles apart, but they're together. Travis is actually making pretty good money, prepaid legal, so he must be higher up in the pyramid angle.
He was one of their best salesmen. Mm. He was a motivational speaker.
Yeah, he would actually get hired to do basically to help people recruit other people. Right. So I go to these little meetings at, I guess, hotels, other convention center type places, and all the people who wanted to recruit, they would get together and pay him, and he would basically sell the new people coming in, get them excited, very much like Amway. Like they call people in together and they just try to get everybody excited when these kind of bizarre and unrealistic expectations in terms of earnings.
Get them excited about the kind of money you can make at PPL, and then kind of motivate them in like boosting them up, boost up their self-esteem, boost up their potential, talk about how they can seize all of their potential. Very motivational stuff, which was stuff I would have talked about how to become a motivational speaker.
You would have been very good at it, I can tell.
I think I would have been. Yeah. I would have
clearly believe in it.
Clearly, I believe in getting the money from that side of things. It just, unfortunately, never worked out, and I had to settle for becoming a counselor.
Yeah. Wow, what a step down. That's a That's like missing a step. That's like 2 steps. One shot.
Thanks for making me feel better.
They always talk about the millionaires, like, oh, here's the latest millionaire in the company, and here's the latest person that's got up to this certain level. And I'm sure a lot of them have different levels you can attain of based on your sales and things like that. And they always focus on those people. Look at how many people have made it in this company.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about motivational speakers, we see people like Tony Robbins bringing in millions of dollars, but we very rarely talk about the motivational speaker in the subway in New York who's making nickels and quarters.
Yeah. But yeah, people think, Tony Robbins and James Arthur Ray, another one that people tend to think of. Like, and I have videos about both of those guys and some other, other spiritual gurus and kind of people that engage in activities that may not be completely legitimate. And we see a number of things with this crowd. And I don't know how big Travis was into this, but I kind of picture him as a mini James Arthur Ray. I think he was like 1 step away from killing people in a sweat lodge. But the idea is that kind of you bring in the people and you try to look very successful. Like you have showy, nice clothes, rings, jewelry, whatever. And you take about all the traditional barriers. Like, do you have an education? College education, high school education? Did you drop out of 6th grade? Doesn't matter. Because success is all your mindset. It's nothing to do with reality. It's this magical fantasy I'm making up as I go along. And then they paint this picture of like, you can drive a Maserati or a Rolls Royce or McLaren. These days, probably not McLaren. Like, you can be successful too. And all you have to do is think the right way. And you can break down these barriers. When you get to specifics, they never seem to have answers about, how do I actually get the $1 to add up to the next dollar? And then the next, that's a great question. And, first you just got to pay this fee. We'll get you into this program. We'll teach you all the secrets of how to do it.
That's where I went wrong as a motivational speaker. Honesty. I'm honest. If I just set the honesty aside, I would have been a great motivational speaker.
If you just knew that.
There's still time, like.
Because I would have told that person, how do I do this? Well, you don't really. You go get a job, and while your job, you pay me, and that's why it never worked out. Like, I think I was just honest, and that was my downfall as a motivational speaker. I had to parlay that honesty into becoming a motivational listener.
My favorite, when you talk about motivational speakers and motivating people, the favorite one that comes to mind is fictional, but the movie Heavyweights comes to mind. You guys ever seen Heavyweights? So it's a 90s movie. Ben Stiller, one of the stars in it, and it's a camp. I forget the name of the camp, but it's maybe the name of the camp is Heavyweights.
Yes, I have seen this movie. I do remember it.
So they call it a fat camp, and it's just for bigger kids, and they're supposed to go there, supposed to lose weight, but it's just they're there to have fun. So Ben Stiller, the guy loses the camp. Ben Stiller comes in. His name's Tony Perkis. Tony Perkis Sr., and he's real motivational. He comes in, he's doing all these exercises. He brings a whole group of people in, and he's really, really beating them down, sometimes literally, to lose weight and things like that. But the whole movie is all about him motivating them and encouraging them, but he's terrible at it, and they hate him.
Spoiler alert, Ben Stiller's the bad guy in this movie. The kids are the good guys.
So when I think of motivation, I think of Tony Perkis Sr., and I'm sure a lot of listeners have seen that as well.
Yeah, it's an industry very short on details, right? It's always these vague concepts. Life coaches often do the same thing. Like they charge sometimes thousands of dollars per hour, but many charge like $100, $50, $100 an hour. And they just give you these generic platitudes. It's almost like the worst of counseling packaged up and delivered in the worst way. Like the things that we say as counselors that may be pulled out of context, like the encouraging things that, you just pull out of context and you lose all the things where we are being realistic and trying to help people, change their thought patterns. You just pick a few things, like how does that make you feel? Like take that, soundbite, which is awful, makes me cringe even saying it, and just move that over. Just like you see like on TV, whenever mental health counselors are represented, like I think there was a counselor in Law and Order. I always say SUV. I think it's SVU.
SVU.
Yeah, Special Victims Unit. But there was a counselor that was in there for a long time that I forget, it was a lieutenant. I can't remember. Mariska Hargitay was the actress, but I forget. Benson? Was it Benson? Was that her? Officer Benson, yeah. So, and he would kind of sit there and because she had issues from dealing with all these sex offenders and stuff. And, the dialogue, I'm sure, was written, probably by somebody who had some familiarity with counseling or whatever, but it was just so stale and awful. And that's how life coaches and motivational speakers are. It's like it's the worst parts of what we do packaged up in the worst way.
I gotta say, I've never once in practice used the phrase, "Tell me about your mother." Never once. How does that make you feel? Is not something I tend to say. I tend to just reflect what I think it is they're feeling, and they can tell me if I'm right or wrong. And that usually works out because a lot of times they're like, "That's exactly how I felt." Mm-hmm. And it works. So that's the magic of being a counselor, is empathy. But the magic of being a life coach is the phrase life coach.
That's the extent of their education.
Apparently. And you don't have to have a license to be a life coach. You can just be like, pay me thousands of dollars and I'll coach your life.
You don't have to
And look at me, I'm successful.
You don't have to have anything to be a life coach. Like literally anyone can call themselves like a master ninja life coach, level 10.
Where do I find this person?
No,
and the more descriptors you put on there, they can really build themselves up to make them sound like they've got tons of experience in this, and they've, could probably make themselves sound like they've gone to school for this, or they have some kind of credentials associated with it based on the title they give themselves. So the sky's really the limit for that.
Now, I'm not going to completely badmouth the whole life coaching thing, because I know plenty of counselors who have included that as part of their resume. Mm-hmm. Say counselor and life coach, because then they can charge more money. But they actually have the education and they're doing the job of a counselor. But there are a lot of people out there who are like, I don't need mental health stuff, but I do need somebody to coach my life. And it's a way of bringing them in. So I'm not going to completely down the life coach thing. It's just the people who just take the title and say, pay me thousands of dollars and I'll make your life better too. Just, that's shysterism.
Yeah, it's different when a qualified counselor offers
TM,
life coaching.
That's a trademark right now, by the way. Shysterism. I just made that up. I'm going to trademark that.
You heard it here first.
If anybody uses in the comments, the money's got to go right to Mike.
Yeah, so legitimate mental health professionals who offer life coaching as a service, that's what it is. They still have the qualification. But what bothers me is the people who had an epiphany, had an experience, had an awakening, and all of a sudden the knowledge of life coaching was imparted them by galactic beings or whatever. And there's people like this.
David Icke.
David Icke.
Bhagwan Rajneesh. Rajneesh, maybe? I mean, you could really debate, was he enlightened by anything or not? I suppose you could say that with anybody, but people followed him. You
can learn about both of them on Alien Lizard Humanoids on Grande Media.
That's right. And very interesting discussions on those guys. So maybe we can do a video about life coaches someday. It's a great industry for comedic value.
I think we just did.
We'll break that one off into a separate episode.
The tangent part.
Tangents. Welcome to this episode of Tangents. Who knows what we're going to talk about?
We don't.
All right. So moving back to Jodi Arias, again, Travis making a lot of money. He was feeling fit. He was working out. He was losing weight. And all of a sudden, he found himself with a number of romantic options. Again, the kind that he was interested in, which was the marriage, people that wanted to potentially marry him. But he still really liked the sex with Jodi. that was
Keeps coming back to it.
Yeah, he just couldn't get past that. They first had vaginal sex in May of 2007. So just a few months after they became a couple officially. Over the next several months, Travis became more distant as he started maybe exploring these other options a little more thoroughly. And friends of Travis would recount how he was kind of flirty. So Jodi was picking up a signal that was there. Mm-hmm. He was flirting with just about everybody who was interested in a marriage. They continued to have sex, but the relationship really was only about sex at this point. In June of 2007, so again, we're a pretty tight time frame. This is happening quick, which brings us back to the world of cluster B features. Jodi said that she broke up with Travis, yet they continued to talk about sex. So they had discussions, and some of these discussions were recorded. We'll get to that later. I think she recorded quite a few of them at this point.
Yeah, I think it was during that time period where she actually started recording those conversations. And a lot of it wasn't just them talking about sex. It was kind of what we would refer to now today as like sexting.
Right.
And there was phone, they were having phone sex and things like that. And I think that there was definitely a sense of they had established a rapport about, the boundaries and the locations of things that were titillating for them, for both of them going in. And she played up to those things.
Yeah. We'll talk about the recordings. I think the recordings offer a lot of insight into her personality and her state of mind at the time. So the next month, July 2007, Jodi moved to Arizona, not far from where Travis lived. And Travis started dating a 19-year-old woman named Lisa, who was part of LDS. So she was a preferable partner in a lot of ways. She started out as LDS. She was younger, I think, than Jodi was, right? At this point. Yeah, younger. And he was highly attracted to Lisa. This was a big deal for him. She found out that he was still having sex with Jodi. That became problematic for her. She broke up with him. Then they went into an on-off cycle, and they would break up for the last time in February 2008. Lisa felt as though Travis was too sexually aggressive. He couldn't control his drive. He was always thinking about it, talking about it, and she thought he was pushing too hard for marriage. These are two things you usually don't see at the same time as a concern. Usually it's like too interested in sex and not wanting to commit. But he was interested in sex and did want to commit.
Yeah, he wanted the marriage. I think he was kind of pushing her for marriage and talking about the sex, but he was still seeing Jodi on and off during that time period. Like if he really wanted to have, and I think that was the big problem, is that he wanted the sex and Lisa was trying to be good. Mm-hmm. She was trying to be good in the sense of the LDS community. And I think that I think they were actually both on the same page with that, because I think that was one of the draws why he was interested in her, was because she was that pure, and why ultimately Jodi was never going to be the marriage material for someone like Travis, because the image was really important to him. Mm-hmm. And because that was where he made his money. And that's how he made his livelihood. And that was important in the community. And so someone like Lisa would have been much more socially acceptable within the circle. So she was a great wife material where Jodi was not.
I think that's exactly how Travis thought about it. And this is where we get to the crowd that really doesn't like Travis too much, like we talked about before. Mm-hmm. He comes off as kind of using Jodi. And this only gets expanded as we move to the next love interest, a woman named Mimi, also young. He considered her exceptionally attractive and thought she was so attractive she could help him get over Jodi. So he transferred some of his sexual fantasies over to Mimi. They became more numerous, bizarre, and unusual. So he's straying into some new areas, which is kind of surprising to me because it sounds like he covered pretty much everything with Jodi. Like, I don't know how much further you can take sex, but I guess, creativity, right?
We don't have the time for that. Just saying.
And the fact that we even know this, right? Know how devious he may have been with that, or how many fantasies, he had in his mind, it tells us a lot about, I guess, Jodi, because this is coming from her and her journal and emails and things like that, all those things that she kept and the recordings and everything. We know so much about the relationship, in particular their sex life. And I don't know that I can really think of anything else, any other case or any other instance where we know so much about the intimate details about a couple or people that weren't even a couple for the majority of what the time period we're talking about.
Well, the interesting thing beyond that is that we don't know much else about the rest of their relationship. We know a lot about the intimate details about their sex life, but very little beyond that about what was going on when they were just home not having sex.
Yeah, I don't think there was anything going on. I think that's what Jodi was kind of hinting at, right? That he was all about that.
The whole relationship was based on it. Yeah.
And I think that given her past relationships and things, I think that there was an aspect of Jodi was very tumultuous to live with. That it was a lot of big emotions all the time, very dramatic. Everything was dramatic. You know, if Travis said that he didn't want to have sex one day when she did, it was a huge thing. If he said he wanted to have sex and she didn't, it was a huge thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the reasons why Travis he was drawn to it because, hey, that's the sex outlet. But, and it kind of became a very codependent relationship where they were both very drawn by the drama of each other. But ultimately he was like, this is why she's not going to make a good wife, because I'm going to, if I marry her, I'm going to spend the next 60 years doing this.
Yeah, I think he also entered into a disgust cycle that speaks to your point there, Mike. Like, he would kind of indulge in the sex, and she was a willing partner, and exploring things as well with him. And then he would feel guilty because he was violating his own value system, the one he was trying to actually stick with in terms of his marriage selection. So I think he started to feel shame and then put that back on Jodi, like she was the devil, like she was a temptress that kept luring him back to the same place. Mm-hmm. Even though it's clear from the recordings that he was aggressive and he initiated a lot. So, if there was shame, he was an equal partner, if not more of a partner, in generating that shame.
Yeah. I think you're definitely right about that. Like he was very involved in seeking her out, just as much as she was in seeking him out. That's part of the codependency. They needed each other in that way, and it became very difficult for them to separate from that. Even when Jodi moved in April 2008, she moved to Wairika to live with her grandparents. She still kept in contact with them. Mm-hmm. There was still more text messages, still more emails, still more phone calls. They didn't go a day without talking on the phone. And it became really a very enmeshed relationship. They were very, very tied closely together. They couldn't separate from one another.
Yeah.
And it just was so chaotic.
Yeah, so you mentioned the move to her grandparents in California. So this happened after, so we see that Travis had the sexual fantasies becoming more bizarre. Mimi rejected him for that reason. So now he's back to just with Jodi. And Jodi had what some people describe as a mental breakdown and moved to California with her grandparents. Travis had mixed emotions about all this. He was happy that she was gone, but he also wanted sex, which is, I guess, pretty predictable based on his behavior so far.
I mean, there was also other behaviors that Jodi was doing prior to that, but in the time when he was dating others, Lisa and Mimi. Like at one point, she slashed his tires. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, I can't say that.
Allegedly.
Travis's tires were slashed.
Somebody did it.
Yeah. And many of Travis's friends immediately thought Jodi. Right?
Yeah, pretty good indicator, but allegedly.
Yeah, allegedly. My apologies for the blanket statement.
So after Jodi moved, so she's backing up to grandparents, Travis earned a trip through the multi-level marketing arrangement to Cancun, Mexico. He invited Mimi to go with him. She agreed but said, look, we are just friends. Made that very clear to him for committing to that. He really wanted to impress her in advance of the trip. He was trying to basically win her back, and he tried to get on good terms with the LDS Church. He thought that was the route because, again, his bizarre attitudes toward sexual behavior seemed to be disparate from the expectations of the church, and that's why Mimi rejected him. So this was his way back in. He wanted to set aside what he called his evil ways.
If I'm correct, he had originally invited Jodi to go on that trip. But then all of this happened, and we haven't talked about it yet, but there was Jodi had gotten into his Facebook account, or hacked into his Facebook account. It kind of made him really mad, of course, and he said, you're the worst thing that ever happened to me. we're done, never talk to me again kind of thing. So it was my understanding, I may be wrong on this, but that he had originally invited Jodi, but then events started to unfold and he wanted nothing to do with her. And that's where Mimi stepped into it. Of course, just as friends, but that would have really made Jodi mad as well.
Yeah, there was a lot of these two kind of angering each other with life choices and attitudes. That seems to be a theme, back and forth. And Travis with other people as well, including Mimi. So we see again, moving back to LDS church, setting aside the evil ways, Travis gets back into this working out cycle. He tries to improve his physical image, ostensibly to find a woman that would be his wife. He didn't last too long with that. By April of 2008, Travis and Jodi were once again communicating in a sexually explicit manner. And we see the recordings become more of an issue. So this is a period of time, too, where there were many recordings that I think most of which or all of which were played at trial. A lot of them, I believe, were.
Definitely a lot.
A lot of them were.
Yeah, Travis, I agree, was on trial along with Jodi.
Oh, yeah.
And these recordings did not help him. I mean, he's dead, so, probably doesn't care. But it didn't help in terms of it helped Jodi a little. I guess I'll put it that way.
To paint the picture of Travis being primarily the bad guy, as Jodi would say.
Yeah. Her case was pretty weak as far as the criminal element, but for whatever she did have to latch onto, Travis's behavior was the key. And I think that she really did smear him up pretty good in the trial.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, he said some things that were... The context was there. I mean, she had hours of recordings. It wasn't like, oh, you pulled those words out of context.
Right.
No, he really stuck by it.
But still, even with those recordings were out of context. I mean, it doesn't take into account that they'd had several years at this point of building up what their sex language, right? These are the things that titillate both of us, and these are the things that boost us up, and the understanding that this is fantasy. Because we're both, consenting adults, there's a fantasy element in this. But so in that way, those recordings, I think, were taken out of context, and specifically done so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, in terms of, there's always a wider context. And I think that what Jodi did so well is, and I wanted to get to this in terms of her behavior on the recordings, she really acted well on the recordings to make him look bad. And it was obvious listening to the recordings that she knew what she was going to do with them in the future. I don't know if she knew a murder trial would be on the stand, but...
I don't think it was a murder plan. I think it was definitely going to be we'll release these and smear.
Yeah. Well, which is what she was doing when she was charged with murder. Like, you get this real sense that she was saving this up, and she loved it when he went into something, especially aggressive and sexual at the same time. And she was kind of playing off that in a very shallow, manipulative way. And it's obvious in the recordings, even without knowing that she would eventually kill him. Like, you don't even need to know that. And it's like, wow, this guy's being, a little bit played, but he's also kind of aggressive. So it's like, well, they're both just not nice people. And that's a win for Jodi in a trial. Like, that's, her self-smearing didn't hurt her. Mm-hmm. Smearing Travis helped her.
She would speak and laugh and everything in a very playful way. When the context of it didn't say that, and even her tone didn't really even seem to imply that she wanted to respond in that way. So to your point, Dr. Grande, of her acting, which we had talked about before, she would probably make a great actress. She did a lot of that, and she was able to use it to her advantage pretty greatly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's, I think that people saw that in the courtroom and thought, wow, Travis is awful. But you could also hear that same recording and think, Jodi's awful.
Yeah. There was definitely an aspect of where she was a willing participant in every single one of those recordings. And she was not just willing, but enthusiastic in most of it. And it was really disturbing for some of the people who were in the courtroom when they were playing those. As these were X-rated recordings.
Oh yeah,
these are not just playful little banter recordings. They were explicit.
Not the least of which were her family and his family.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I think there's a natural tendency with this type of behavior, even though, can get into an area of morality. I mean, everybody's got to decide what's right and wrong for them, but there's a natural tendency, I think, to be a bit embarrassed about this content, even if you're okay doing it, even if you're like, look, it's my business, I can do what I want. Jodi was not embarrassed on the stand at all. She loved it. You could see.
She was the center of attention.
Yeah.
Everyone was paying attention to her.
If there was 1,000 hours of recording, she would have loved it was just to hear him talk about like LDS and his values, and then to say those things, the hypocrisy, she latched onto that, and she glowed on the stand when he did that. And I think making his family squirm in the bleachers there, and in the audience, I think that was.
I've been on the stand before about a dozen times for a previous job, and one of the most uncomfortable things ever. And you get a little bit more used to it, but there's so much uncertainty there about what's the lawyer going to say, what's the judge going to say, and I didn't even do anything wrong. Mm-hmm. I was just talking about my interaction with other people, pretty basic stuff.
Didn't you though? Didn't you?
I knew you were going to say it. Don't ask too many questions, all right?
All right.
It's just family court as far as you know.
Fair.
If you had prepaid legal, they could have
helped you out with that.
If only I would have paid into it. You know what?
You could have been part of the whole multi-tiered marketing.
That should have been my entrance.
You could have brought in your downline or whatever they call people.
But it was the most uncomfortable thing, and so I'm seeing Jodi, the way that she's acting, or the way she's not reacting in this situation, and she was pretty straight-faced in every recording that I saw. And as she did cry at times, she did hide her face at times, but it was not the kind of visible reaction that I had or that anybody else would have, because I was obviously nervous up there. And again, I didn't do anything wrong. I was just up there on behalf of somebody else. And it's a terrible. There's a lot that you don't know. So many the lawyers, the judge, and everybody can say they're liable to say anything, and you've got to be able to respond on the stand. And not like you can stand up there and be like, let me prepare something before I respond to you. You got to respond there. And so that's a difficult position. But for Jodi to act like that, I think is very unusual, and really not have any kind of reaction at all. It really tells me something about who she is, I think.
Yeah. I think it was an extension of her hatred for Travis. So, she stabbed and shot him, which we'll get to. And I think this was her chance to kick his dead body.
I think it's interesting you mentioned the crying, because I haven't watched every second of the court stuff, but the 18 days of testimony, and there's a lot of it is recorded, but there were several instances where, like, Jodi's sitting there on the witness stand. She has a balled up tissue in her hands, and there were a couple of times I noticed, especially when she was being cross-examined, where she put her head down and she brought the thing up to her thing, and when she looked back up, there was nothing. There was nothing. Like, she didn't wipe her eyes or anything, but she just had the tissue up to her nose, and she made a sniffling noise and looked up, and there's nothing. Her eyes aren't wet. There's nothing. And it's just like, okay, I'm supposed to believe that you were crying. And I don't want to sound like Nancy Grace or anything like that, because that's the first thing that one of those talking heads like Nancy Grace would point out. It's like, she didn't really cry. There were no tears. But there were times when there were tears. Mm-hmm. There were other times where there clearly were not. And it's a lot of her testimony came off as very manipulative.
Yeah, she sounded very much like the recordings. Like, I think that shallow essence is in both. So we see that at this point, again, we have a lot of this sex talk. They get into an argument because Jodi logs into Travis's Facebook, somehow gets the password or his computer, I don't know, but got in there. That ended the relationship. He ended it. Now we move to June 4, 2008. Again, Travis lives in Arizona. Jodi Arias arrives at his residence at 4:30 a.m. She had obtained gas cans. There's a couple different stories with the gas cans, but she obtained them either way in order to avoid fueling her vehicle in Arizona. Because if you stop to fuel, there's cameras and stuff, and there's receipts if you use a credit card or whatever. It also appears as though she had taken a .25 caliber pistol from her grandparents' house. Her grandfather specifically was the owner of a weapon fitting that description that was now missing.
Yeah, a week before this happened, there was a burglary at her grandparents' house that was reported. And a police officer came out, took a statement of, amongst a few jewelry items. One of the things that was missing was a .25 caliber pistol. And Jodi, in her diaries leading up to this, she wrote that she was going to go visit a new boyfriend in Utah. And that's where she's going.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently she had mentioned that she was still talking to Travis the entire time. They were broken up, but they didn't miss a day of talking to each other. And she mentioned that she was going. And apparently, according to her diary, according to Jodi, he wasn't happy about that. He didn't like the fact that she was going to go meet somebody else. He tried to convince her to come stop by his place on her way. If she was going to make the trip, you at least stop by the house and see me. And kind of, she said he became very convincing, and he almost guilted me into it. But I stood firm. I was resolute, and I didn't go. I'm not going to go because this is prior to the trip. And then she went on the trip.
She had receipts from every other part of the trip, is my understanding. She had a box of receipts that investigators had found. And so, yeah, those gas cans came up because she didn't have any receipts from, one point to the next. And, of course, we know that she was in Arizona. And so how'd you get there? Where are the receipts for that? And even the rental car that she had, it was, they kind of analyzed the mileage on it that she had used based on what they started with. And there's some confusion there as well. Like, this doesn't really add up fully, but based on what you had said.
Right. When investigators first talked to her, she denied everything. And if she kept with that denial, like the gas cans would have, having the gas, being able to get into Arizona and back out of Arizona without having to stop at a gas station and have a potential receipt or credit card ping or being caught on camera, like that would have helped her in that. And I think that's one of the reasons why prosecutors were like, this is definitely premeditated.
Yeah, she appeared to want to make it, to have the potential for this to be a secret, this trip. Now, it turns out that it can't be for some other reasons, but so at this point, we see that she's there, 4:30 a.m., and the couple has sex. Now, it's worth noting here, 25 caliber automatic Colt pistol is a very small cartridge, one that is favored by shooters that cannot tolerate a lot of recoil, like inexperienced shooters. It's also usually for concealed carry. Any firearm is dangerous, but a 25 ACP is considered not a great round for self-defense.
I think the only thing smaller is a 22. I mean, there's other smaller rounds, but the only other popular smaller round is a 22.
Yeah, a 22 long rifle, a rimfire round, is actually used in a lot of homicides, which I find interesting because, it's not even as effective as the 25 ACP, but it's very common. 22s are everywhere, they're cheap, and they have almost no recoil. So,
and being a rimfire, they actually have the benefit of not having a primer that gets struck by firing.
Well, it's in the ring.
Right.
Right, yeah.
So the without that strike, it can be more difficult to match a casing to a particular gun.
Well, the rimfire will hit, like the striker will still, or the hammer, depending on the weapon, will still hit the rim, like it makes an indentation on the rim.
It's much smaller, and it's kind of on the side. It's more difficult to match. It's not impossible, but it's more difficult. When you have a 45 that is a primer that's pretty substantial, and it's center fire, it's easier to look under a microscope and be like, yeah, those things are really close. They're identical. It's really hard to do that with a 22.
22s are also favorites of the mafia because they favored headshots, and any firearm will work well under those conditions. They're also a little quieter and easy to conceal.
Easier to silence.
Yeah, which is a concern. Mafia's preference seems to be would be a 22 caliber revolver, which makes a lot of sense because there's no ejection of the casing. You don't have to worry about picking up brass. Just a couple of shots, maybe 3, put it in your pocket. That's it. So I think this was probably a weapon of convenience, but it's worth noting that this isn't an ideal round for killing somebody. And I think this speaks to what happened later on, closer to about 5:30 p.m. We see that Jodi stabbed Travis 27 times and shot him in the head.
And slit his throat.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a bad day for Travis.
From ear to ear.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. He did not survive the encounter with Arias. Now, she would be found guilty eventually of first-degree murder. And after many legal complications, I won't go into here, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But there was this whole thing where they took pictures and she put the camera in a washing machine or something.
Yeah, she put it, the camera, the investigators found the camera in the washing machine amongst wet clothing. So it had gone through the wash. And I think that was an attempt to get rid of evidence that she knew was there. But the investigators were able to pull out the SD card and it was still intact. They were able to pull images off of that, images that were clearly recognizable as Jodi Arias. And the metadata on them stated exactly when they were taken. And so there was no like, well, those were taken weeks ago. No. The metadata says it was taken at 6 a.m. on June 4th. We know he died that day. Like there's no getting around that. But Jodi initially, she made contact with investigators after this. Like Travis, like he was in his bathroom for a few days, in the shower, dead. His friends found him dead because he was supposed to go on this trip to Cancun and hadn't talked to anybody.
And he had missed a big meeting.
He'd missed a big meeting.
The same day that he died, maybe the day after.
Yeah. And so his friends went over to check on him, try and find out, make sure he was okay.
This was 5 days later.
Yeah. His friends found out and they called 911. There's a nice call. There's a recorded call of the 911 call where they talk about what happened with the discovery. And then the day after that, Jodi calls the police who are in Mesa to say, I want to help with the investigation.
Well, in a way she did.
She did.
In a way she did, right? I mean, she went down for the full freight of the charges. So
yeah, she was really most helpful in this investigation.
She was very, very helpful. Like after she came in and gave them a short interview, they were still talking to some of his other friends, and they were like, "You should check out Jodi Arias. We think she's the one who did it." And they were like, "Really? She just called us up. We're talking to her right now." And like they when they pushed her about things, they were like, "We know you were there. We have this evidence." Like they showed her the pictures that they pulled. She was obviously very flustered by that because she kept trying to say, "No, I wasn't there. I wasn't there. I wasn't there. I wasn't there." They didn't book her then. They let her go. They didn't let her go, but they scheduled another meeting for the next day. And the next day, they had a female investigator come in to interrogate her, to speak with her, because they thought that it might be easier for her to open up about certain things talking to a female investigator. She didn't say a word to the female investigator.
It was very clear she had no interest.
No interest in talking to the female. And when the female said, "Hey, would you like to talk to this male investigator you were talking to yesterday?" She's like, "Yes." As soon as he comes in, she starts spilling a story, weaving this tale about two individuals who broke into Travis's house while they were having sex, and the guy killed Travis, and the woman wanted to kill her, but the guy was like, "We're not here for her."
Yeah, they were generous.
They were generous and let her live.
Yeah.
And the police, they were investigators were not buying that story at all. Not one bit. And that was the story she stuck with when she was booked. And she even admitted, this is the most shallow thing, was when they said, "We're going to book you for murder." And she's like, "I know this is going to be really shallow, but can I freshen up a bit before my mugshot? I want to look better for my mugshot." And you can look this up on Google. Just Google Jodi Arias mugshot, and you'll see she treated it like a headshot,
like a glamour shot or something.
Like, yeah, it was a glamour shot. Like she had her head tilted to the side. There was a smirk. There was like she was really into this is a photograph, so I'm going to look my best.
All about that image.
Yeah, it's interesting because you would think that the stress of facing potentially the death penalty or life in prison, for offenders would be kind of like on their mind. But this whole thing with the cameras, like looking good, is a common occurrence we see in the true crime around like narcissistic offenders. Pamela Hupp, I did a video on not long ago, who framed a man who went to prison, and she was the one who committed the murder. It's a fascinating case. When she was arrested again for killing someone else, she wanted to be interviewed by a particular reporter who had interviewed her before when she wasn't, considered a criminal, and she wanted to look good for that. Like it's something we see over and over. So it just kind of speaks to a narcissistic angle.
Jodi had some other very bizarre behaviors during that interrogation too. Like the headstand, like during one of the breaks when the investigator had left the room, she goes over to the wall and does a headstand, like she's doing yoga while being interrogated for murder of her longtime boyfriend.
And she had to have known that this was video recorded. She probably could see the camera, if I had to guess, and probably assumed there were other people in the room right next to her that could see exactly what she was doing. So it seems to be all about this image of, I know what I'm doing, and I know there's people watching me, and here I'm going to put on another show for them.
I'm not sure if that's entirely the case. It may have been. I'm not in Jodi's mind at the time, but it may have just been that she didn't even consider the fact that there was a camera there.
Perhaps.
Even if it's up in the corner looking down as a one camera. If she clocked it and noticed that it was there, she might have tried to play up for it. It's also possible that she thought, like, okay, the interrogation's on a break. They're going to turn the camera off.
It's possible.
Because we're break here. So if the camera's off, I can do my thing, and I can calm down from all the stress that I'm under because I'm very, very stressed out right now. So do some yoga and help it out. And undoubtedly, being interrogated for murder is a stressful thing. Being interrogated for a murder that you actually committed, arguably more stressful.
Mm-hmm. Then she started singing Christmas songs or something too. Yeah.
Yeah, the unusual behavior while being interrogated is another thing we see across many offenders as well. Shayna Hubers, I don't know if she did a handstand. I think she did like a cartwheel.
She was doing cartwheels and dancing. We should cover her at some point. Definitely doing cars. She was singing. Mm-hmm. During that, and they had a microphone on, listening to her sing, "I did it, oh yes, I did it." And then the interrogator comes back in the room, and Shayna's just like weeping at that point.
Some people refer to Shayna Hubers as Jodi Arias too. It's got an incredible number of parallels, including the use of firearm. But a phenomenal number of parallels over to this case. So we talked about Jodi. She testified. She went on the stand, testified in her own defense for 18 days.
Now, her defense was not, like when she got to trial, she didn't go with the two people broke in.
No, self-defense.
She abandoned that. She went with self-defense.
Yeah.
And she said that her whole claim was that Travis was abusive during the entire tenure of their relationship, that he was physically abusive, sexually abusive. And then she threw in that he was a pedophile.
Right. Yeah, this also didn't help him, even though the evidence for that's very flimsy. Just somebody saying that in a court of law, I think, really, hurt his reputation even more.
But even some of the other witnesses, Lisa, Mimi, they testified. Several of the other women that he had seen all testified that during their relationships, he didn't seem to have a problem with anger or violence towards them. Which, if there wasn't an element of violence, I'm not saying there was not an element of violence between him and Jodi, but again, it's a pattern thing, and it whether it escalated from their codependency. Mm-hmm. Other relationships were fine, but in the context of Jodi and Travis, it would have things ramped up, things accelerated. So if there was violence involved, there was an element of Jodi being involved in that. And I'm not trying to victim blame an abuse victim, but there's a pattern that doesn't appear with Travis in other relationships.
Yeah, that hurt Jodi, right? If they had come forward and said, yes, he was really aggressive and horrible, and I thought about a few times myself, defending myself against him, like that would have really helped her. But they didn't say anything like that. And they didn't like her, which we should expect, I guess.
They did corroborate the sex part, though, that he talked about it a lot, and it was really on his mind a lot.
But I'm not sure. I'm not sure how much of that was proportional to their experiences being part of LDS. But
Right.
they didn't. It wasn't necessarily that they said 15 times a day he would mention sex. They didn't give exact numbers. They're just like, well, he was kind of a lot.
Right.
He would
What's their
talk about it.
standard?
But what's
Like,
their standard
yeah.
for what's a lot? And is it based on other men in LDS or what's their standard with that? I mean, if he mentions it twice a week, is that a lot in their experience, in their past experience? If it's once a day, is that a lot? Or was it actually like 30 or 40 times a day? Like every conversation they have over the course of the day is, something about sex. And I can't say that. I don't know. But that's the question. Like, what is the standard?
Yeah. And what is the pattern? I mean, with sex drive, we also see, you can picture somebody like Travis really getting it in his mind at certain times and maybe saying it like 50 times in one day, but then not mentioning it for a few weeks. That's really going to stand out, maybe to somebody in LDS in particular, because they're more sensitive to that discussion. So, that flurry of activity would seem really offensive rather than just a moment where he was in the mood or whatever. So yeah, he didn't fare well. His reputation didn't fare well. Jodi did herself in, though, with the 18 hours of testimony.
18 days.
18 days, sorry, yeah, 18 days.
18 hours might have saved her.
That might. Well, testifying on your own behalf, I don't think is ever. Rarely. I've seen a few times, but rarely is it helpful. And in terms of not going to prison, anyway, which usually is the objective for the defendant, anyway. But yeah, the jury was not happy. I think they were going to convict her anyway, honestly. But that kind of sealed the deal.
I mean, like the evidence was plain and obvious that she committed this particular offense, and then her defense was not to say, no, I didn't do it, which it was, I did it, but here's why it's not murder. Mm-hmm. It was self-defense. I was trying to protect myself, this and the other. She said that she'd been taking pictures of him and she dropped the camera, and he said something like a 5-year-old can hold a camera better than you. And mind you, Jodi was very proud of being a photographer. She loved to take pictures and she loved all that kind of stuff. So that would have been a huge insult for her if it was actually said. And then supposedly he picked her up by the throat and then body slammed her onto the floor, and she went running and grabbed the gun. And there's a big conflict between what the medical examiner says happened and what Jodi said happened. She says that she grabbed the gun and shot at him and shot him once. But it didn't slow him down. He kept coming, so she was able to grab a knife and she was trying to stab and defend him. The medical examiner said the gunshot wound was the last wound.
Right.
Right. And that he had defensive wounds on his hands, so he was trying to stop, and he was completely naked. So the stab wounds came through. He was trying to defend himself. And then when he was almost entirely sanguinated, she slit his throat, dragged him into the bathroom, and then shot him in the head.
Yeah, speaks to the anger, right? Because that was unnecessary to commit the murder. It just leaves more evidence.
Right.
And they would testify that the gunshot wound would have incapacitated him, most likely. They didn't have, the brain was so far deteriorated they couldn't tell the path of it, but most likely that would have done it, because it was right in his right temple, I believe, and so that would have really done a lot of damage. Right. So for Jodi to say that, it'd be like, well, the gunshot would have done a whole lot to subdue him.
Right, and I think there was I'm not sure if there was an exit wound, but a 25 caliber or 22, if it doesn't have an exit wound, it's going to bounce, it's going to ricochet in the brain, which is going to do a lot of damage. And the medical examiner did say, a gunshot wound to that place would have instantly incapacitated him. He wouldn't have been fighting back. He would have been done. But that particular wound seemed to have been inflicted after he was already dead. Mm-hmm. But the defense attorney tried to push on that. It was like, but you don't have any forensic evidence of this because the brain was so decomposed. And he's like, no, I don't. But logic dictates. And from my other experiences with these kinds of injuries, this is what would have happened. He would have been incapacitated.
He was stabbed in the back and I think in the legs as well. And so there was pretty good evidence of a struggle there. and that it wasn't just, he attacked you and you had time to turn around and stab him in the back, or, there's a lot of things that really didn't add up in her story.
Yeah.
And some of there was definitely, I don't know, blood spatter analysis is not the greatest, but there was a trail where you could see directionality of where the attacks were, because there was like handprints on the wall, Travis's handprints on the wall from where he was struggling to go from one room back into the bathroom, and he was moving in that direction and sliding, his blood smearing all over the place. Like, the whole crime scene was covered in blood. It was not a pleasant sight, and it was a very harsh way for someone to die. And whether you like Travis or not, whether he was abusive towards Jodi, it's not an appropriate response.
No, that was a horrible way to die, for sure. And, he probably suffered quite a bit. One of the theories I've seen on this case is that she made like a final appeal to go on the Cancun trip after sex. And he once again said, no, I'm going with, I think it was Mimi, as friends. And that was, so she had it in her mind, like a backup plan. Like, so I don't think she went there with the thought that she was 100% going to kill him. I think she wanted available as an option, a serious option. But turns out she did cash that in, and gave up a lot of ground by admitting that she was the one who killed him and switching to the self-defense thing. But with the camera, I feel like she got stuck a bit.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff with her memory,
right,
when she was testifying in court, and some of the psychologists that looked into it saying like, oh yeah, PTSD can absolutely get rid of memory. Of course, her story was that after she was body slammed, she blacked out. Like after the gunshot, she blacked out. She does not have a story for how she got the knife in her hand. She doesn't have a story for any of the other things, the events that happened, dragging him into the shower. Like, she doesn't have anything for that in her explanation, which I think really, really hurt her. And one of the psychologists who had done assessments on her was testifying about, he gave her a diagnosis of PTSD, and in PTSD there can be some dissociative episodes, especially surrounding a traumatic event, and arguably killing someone, traumatic event.
Right.
But he was kind of discredited because he based all of his findings on when she was still lying about the other two individuals. She hadn't taken responsibility. At that point, she didn't say, yes, I killed him. She was still saying, like, these two people came in and did this. And this particular psychologist also had engaged, like, he bought her a self-help book while he's trying to do an assessment on her, which arguably is engaging in clinical therapy with her. And as an assessor, it's not his job.
Yeah.
Like, he crossed a barrier. The prosecutor accused him of having formed an attachment to her or relationship with her, which kind of was titillating. I think it did a number on his career, but...
Well, that's Jodi's MO, is getting somebody to attach to her and really develop a relationship. And
especially
she's
men.
really good at that. Yeah.
Yeah, she was highly effective at that. But, I think this speaks to, this case, just like so many of the high-profile cases where the mental health clinicians have different stories on each side, is just another testament to how flimsy the science is behind mental health assessment. It's just not our strength in terms of, like, as a field. We're pretty good at getting results when people are anxious and depressed and obsessed and have trauma and everything. But determining when somebody's lying or not and what their mental state is on top of that, it's, there's always two different stories. You have all these experts on each side who are very qualified, and they always seem to come up with a narrative that supports their point of view. B.F. Skinner was right, the father of behaviorism. He's right. We can't observe thoughts. We can't observe emotions. We can only observe behaviors. But we tend to listen to the words of people. And I don't know, as a clinician, I take people's word at face value. Which I think is a successful strategy in mental health therapy when somebody's not being accused of a crime.
But I'm not assessing them for criminality or truth telling. And it really, there is no science that it can be 100% effective at determining if somebody lies. And we've talked about polygraphs before. Polygraphs are notoriously unreliable. They're invalid things. There is no science. And the micro expressions is also another like pseudoscientific thing that just doesn't.
Body language.
Yeah, there's no there's no 100% way because anything you can think of to be able to try and determine truth telling, someone's going to figure out how to fake that.
Yeah, the only hope with somebody interviewing somebody like Arias is to schedule several assessments over time and try to catch her in concrete inconsistencies. Even then, you could argue, well, the trauma affected her memory or her mood or whatever, or she was lying, but now she's telling the truth, or she was telling the truth, now she's lying. So yeah, it's tough. When the mental health clinicians testify in these cases, I always cringe because it's not the strength of our field. Our field wasn't designed to figure out when people, what their motives are for crimes and when they're telling the truth.
And we can really just expect at a certain point that whatever the defense's case is, that's what they're going to say. Whatever the prosecution's case is, that's what the other person's going to say.
Yeah.
That's the way it always seems to go. It seems to, there's not a whole lot of impartiality, but just partial to whatever it is the person's arguing.
You give this story for the people that are paying you.
Yeah, right.
Right. There's no tenure system in the court system for court expertise. Like you don't just get, the government pays you and you give your opinion based on neutral facts. And it doesn't matter what that opinion is, you're still going to get paid. If the defense is paying you, you got to give the defense the results that they want.
Yeah. The most accurate seems to be when the court, like sometimes the judge will order an assessment independent of the state and the defense. But even then, they often disagree in a direction. Just you see like 3 different directions, and nobody seems right. But yeah, the defendant, pretty much the defense is always going to say psychosis, and the prosecution is always going to say personality disorder. That's what I've seen probably 75% of the time in the high-profile cases. I forget what they had for Arias. I know that borderline. There was an argument over borderline. I think so. Some other disorders. There was different arguments. I don't think there was ever a consensus as to what she technically had diagnostically.
I don't think there was. There was PTSD. Was definitely one. Borderline personality disorder was another, and they definitely talked about other types of trauma-based disorders. Some of the psychologists were very clear about like she was abused when she was a kid, and others were like she was the abuser when she was a kid, and there's no evidence that she did any abusing, and that's backed up by some of her other family members. But she definitely committed the crime. She definitely killed Travis Alexander.
Yeah, with a knife and with a gun. Yeah, so it wasn't like she tripped him and he hit his head on an anvil. Like this was somebody who was very angry and wanted him to, wanted to mutilate him. And then also, that final insult or another insult of shooting him in the head, which was unnecessary because I think he was already dead at that point. And
leaving him naked in the shower.
Yeah, well, I think the aesthetic was something she was looking for, right? She wanted that look. Like, look how vulnerable and exposed he is, and now you can see like sex was all he was about, and here he is naked. Like it was poetry to her.
And having experience in photography, that's a lot of what those pictures captured as well. Was here's him in the shower, he's posing or whatever he's doing, but similar thing. He's vulnerable, not wearing any clothes. He's in an enclosed space as well. He can't get out of this space easily anyway. And that's how she left him as well. And I was thinking about she's fairly small, and he's not real big or anything, but certainly bigger than her. I don't think there's any circumstance where she could carry him. So he must have ended up in there, maybe running from her, trying to get away from her, defending himself. That's must have just ended up in there.
That's definitely what the crime scene seems to indicate. Right. The blood smears on the wall, kind of all heading back to the bathroom from where they had been, where the attack started. So he ended up in there, and then she just kind of manhandled him, shoved him into the shower. Because
there was that picture, the last picture. I think it was the last picture on that memory card. Her foot and like the bottom of her pants, and then Travis's bloody body right next to her. So I'm curious if there was any more of a struggle after that, or if she did kind of push him back into the shower. And we may never know the answer to it, but those pictures really told a lot. Especially the timestamps, and we know exactly when these things happened. In the last picture, before he was murdered, and that accidental, perhaps, picture of part of his body. It was very telling.
It looks like that picture was one that was taken accidentally when she dropped the camera.
Right.
Like she'd apparently been carrying the camera the entire time and dropped it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when it took that one particular picture. And it's a really disturbing image.
It is.
To see that particular one. And it was definitely an unintentional picture. The gun was never found. And, surprisingly, not surprisingly, her grandfather's gun was never found either.
Yeah, amazing.
She claims that it was Travis's gun. She says that she knew where he kept his gun, his .25 caliber gun, in the house, and she ran to get that, and she shot him with that. But her grandfather's gun was never found, and they never found Travis's gun. So,
yeah, she might have taken that as well.
Or the knife. They never found the knife, correct?
Nope. Those were both all disposed of. I think she said she disposed of both of them in the desert. When she woke up, she came out of her fugue state after killing him. She's covered in blood in the middle of the desert, having driven there. And she had this knife and this gun, and she tossed them out into the desert, and then got in a car, went and cleaned up. And then she never wrote anything about it in her diary or anything, just all positive things. And then she called the police to be part of the investigation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, she very well could have gotten away with it if she had, not left the camera behind. I think that was one of the keys. She did dispose of the murder weapons. She did cover her tracks fairly well, considering she doesn't seem that sophisticated. I mean,
I think you're right. If it hadn't been for the camera, I think she could have gotten away with it. If the police didn't have time-stamped photos
mm-hmm.
of her being there, she could have said, I wasn't there. And then any DNA evidence they came up with from there could have been, well, yeah, I'd been there for...
Yeah, which everyone would corroborate.
We had sex there. I was there for a lot. I lived there for a little while. And other people would corroborate that. So she would have been much better off. And then she'd been able to say, well, I had planned this trip to Utah, and I ended up in Utah.
Mm-hmm. And she did.
Right? Yeah, she did. That's where she went afterwards. Mm-hmm. So, and she would have been able to say there's no record of me being in Arizona at the time. There's, I didn't stop for gas or anything.
Yeah, and, Travis did have other romantic relationships that were a little tumultuous. Any romantic relationship can turn homicidal. So the police maybe think, well, somebody else did it. Yeah, he had some relationship we didn't know about, and someone killed him.
Maybe it was about the money.
Yeah, it's...
But I think that she got tripped up by thinking that putting the camera in the washing machine was going to destroy it. And to be fair, it did destroy the camera.
It could have. Right. Yeah, it could have.
The camera was destroyed. The camera was unusable after that. But that SD card, it being a solid state thing, it didn't get destroyed because the camera was off when it was put in the washing machine.
The interesting part, too, is that Travis had two roommates that had no idea that his decomposing body was in there for 5 days. They smelled something, but as far as I know, they just attributed it to, we're three bachelors living in the same house. Of course, things are going to smell, and the camera's in the washing machine, and nobody noticed that clanging around in there, even though it was going through cycles. So, maybe there were things that were missed there that could have found him a little bit sooner and maybe shed some more details on things, without as much decomposition. So I'm curious about the roommates and what was going on there and why that wasn't noticed. But, maybe they just never really thought about it. Maybe they weren't around as much.
I think it was one of those houses that didn't have a lot of shared space. Like they had like the kitchen and the living room, but everything else was kind of separated off. And everything happened in Travis's apartment, essentially. So they wouldn't have gone in there.
Yeah.
Just like if we had an four bedroom apartment, and I keep my door closed all the time, I expect my roommates are not going to go into my bedroom. And
yeah, dying's also pretty unlikely for somebody like Travis. So it's probably like they could have said, well, maybe it's like a rat or a mouse that died, or the neighbors did something, or they would probably make excuses for a while with the smell. But there is a point where it becomes undeniable.
Mm-hmm.
And once you've smelled that, if you ever smelled it, like you can never smell it, like
Never forget it.
stays with you forever. So that maybe haunts them,
I'm sure it does.
picking that up. So so Jodi is 41 now, and she's in prison for life. No chance of parole under any circumstances. Like, it's just not going to happen. That's a long time since the homicide, and even a longer time for her lifespan. Likely she's going to live into, let's just say 78 or so, probably even longer, because she's already made it to 41. So statistically, she could be looking at 85 longer. It's a long time to think about what she did, and I kind of wonder, with these type of murders, is the regret getting caught, like leaving the camera and things like that, or is there some other regret, or is there no regret?
I don't want to paint Jodi as like just complete monster, because I think that a lot of it had to do with the mental health issues that she was struggling with. Not that, and I will say this blanket statement: people who have mental health disorders are more likely to be the victims of violent crime than the perpetrators, by and large, like almost 10 times more likely. Mm-hmm. But I think that a lot of this was spur of the moment, but it was only half planned. It was driven by the high emotionality of it, and very passionate about it. And I think you're right. Like, if it was, she went there to try and get back in his good graces and go on the Cancun trip, and if that had happened, nothing ever would have happened. Travis would still be alive. But when he kind of gave her that final, like, no, this is over, she's like, well, if I can't have you, nobody can. Mm-hmm. And I think that given the state of mind we've seen from her with some of the statements she made in the media, and the glow she had being 18 days on the stand, I think her biggest regret is that she can't be in front of the camera more.
Yeah, I doubt she regrets actually committing the crime. I think it would be the attention or getting caught that she regrets. But she didn't seem that broken up about getting caught either. I remember she did an interview with a local channel there while one of the court proceedings was going on.
Yeah, immediately after it.
Right, yeah,
or something along those lines.
But when that interview could have been admissible, right? It wasn't finished,
mm-hmm.
And that's a very bad idea for a defendant because everything you say, that counts.
Oh, one of the worst ones was before the trial started, where she said, "No jury in the world will convict me."
She did say that, yeah.
She was convinced of it,
and the prosecutors played that for the jury, and I was like,
she had to explain that,
and she had to try and explain that. And her explanation was, "Oh, well, I was set on killing myself. I was going to commit suicide, so obviously no jury would convict me," which kind of is belied by the fact that just before that was I'm completely innocent and no jury is going to convict
mm-hmm.
me. It speaks against that whole I was going to kill myself. She always had an answer for things, but most of her answers, again, they were very shallow answers.
Right.
Yeah, she doesn't strike me as somebody who has a lot of insight and kind of deep, complex thinking processes. Very kind of a primal mentality, like responding to what she's seeing at the moment. And that seems to be a theme through a lot of her life.
Impulsivity.
Impulsivity, and what's in front of me is what I want, or is what I hate, or is what I want to destroy. So no long-term planning.
I do think that despite having committed a horrible murder and having had very tumultuous and chaotic relationships throughout much of her life, Jodi comes off, I think that she actually is genuinely a nice person. I think she tries very hard to be positive, keep a positive mindset. Anybody who writes to her, I think she's going to write back to and have some positive things to say. And I think that she's still looking for her next relationship, arguably.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the fact that she committed this murder and it is a strike against her in the relationship department in general.
Yeah, but if we look at borderline features, again, we don't know about the disorder, but there seem to be features of borderline personality. One of the things that people with the disorder, like people who have the official disorder, often say or often suggest or imply through their behavior is that relationships are their life and death.
Mm-hmm.
It's that serious. It's like if you were starving and there was food in front of you, that's how they think about relationships. So that becomes everything, more important than life in prison, more important than anything. Look at the Shayna Huber's case, right? She found, I think we talked about this in another video, she found romance in jail or prison, I can't remember which, and that became everything. It became more important than her defense strategy, than life in prison, which she's now serving. Like, that was...
Spoiler alert for when we get to that episode.
Yeah, for Shayna Huber's. But yeah, with borderline personality features, with cluster, you could argue the other cluster B, one other one, histrionic, that you mentioned, kind of similar. I mean, relationships, specifically with borderline, romantic relationships, with histrionic, probably any type of relationship, they become life and death. That is everything. So whatever death penalty, getting shot, getting stabbed, prison, whatever, it doesn't matter. Like, because they're in a different plane. Like, their existence is very existential. That issue is wrapped up in relationships. It's hard to imagine from a person, from a point of view of not having borderline personality features, what that's like. That seems
very difficult.
Yeah, it seems so foreign. Like, why would anybody value a relationship that much where literally nothing else matters?
Common phrase being used, if you break up with me, I'm going to kill myself. And just how much weight you put on that it's not even worth your life anymore. It's just, my life is the relationship, like you said.
It's a good metaphor, right, for the self-destructiveness and the finality of that relationship. Like, it's everything. If you stay with me, I'm alive. If you're not with me, I'm dead. That's the black and white. That's the juxtaposition of these cases.
And speaking to that, the last thing I want to comment on is that the whole sentencing phase was a fiasco and a half. But initially, Jodi actually asked the jury to sentence her to the death penalty.
Right.
Like, she wanted to go to she told them, like, well, my life isn't worth living without Travis and without all this stuff. So, please sentence me to death. She kind of pled with them to try and give her the death penalty. Just a little bit odd, but it does speak to that mentality of Travis was her life, her livelihood, her everything. And without him and without the ability to get another relationship, and looking at life in prison is, life without any relationships.
Mm-hmm. That's worse than the death penalty for her. Yeah, I mean, think about that. I mean, obviously, I think her sentence was just in this case, but imagine, every day, I mean, she's relatively young, 41, every day waking up in a cell, knowing that you leave in a pine box. Like, there's no, like, that's everything. And then, without Travis or any other, at least without a male romantic partner, that's a heavy penalty for somebody who may have borderline features. Mm-hmm. All right.
I have, if I can interrupt, I've two of the favorite moments of the trial that I was, at least moments that I saw. One came during the closing argument from the defense attorney, and one, I think, was during the... I don't really know when it was, but either way, the defense attorney made a comment. So at this point in the trial, it was a lot about... It wasn't... You're not trying to prove that she didn't do it at that point. They knew she did it, and there was because it was so publicized, because all of the trial was on TV, because it was so long. The trial itself took so many days, so much time. People had so many opinions about it, and there was this growing thing that people just didn't like Jodi. There's a lot of people that didn't like Jodi, and so her attorney even said, 9 out of 10 days, I don't like Jodi. Now, if he cut it right there, period, sat back down, I mean, I think the world would have erupted in applause or something. I don't know. But the point he was making was, even though I don't like her, that's not the point of this. The point of this is, did she premeditate it? Does she actually deserve death? Things like that. And I think it was a bold move, right? Especially for a defense attorney, you're trying to defend your client. And Jodi laughed at that. She laughed at him saying that. So that might speak to their relationship. He had said that she called him constantly, like every day. It was excessive. So it was clear that he was pretty annoyed with her, and that he didn't, even in interviews, he would kind of indicate that he said he wasn't surprised at that verdict, at the outcome of the trial. So he didn't really have a lot of faith in her, is what it ultimately said to me.
And I think that statement was really meant to try and get the jury to look beyond the emotionality of it,
Right.
of how Jodi comes across,
Yeah.
and try and look more at the events of,
The facts.
at the facts as the defense had
Right.
presented them. And I think they looked at the facts as the prosecution presented them and said, that's way more likely.
Right.
But I loved that moment too. I thought it was
Yeah.
like a defense attorney just saying, and like we see that in movies sometimes. So like, I don't like my defense. I don't like him. I think he's a piece of crap. But you may have been a piece of crap doing this, but he didn't kill him or rape somebody. Like,
when you look through a lot of these cases, you see a lot of very good defense attorneys. F. Lee Bailey, who died not that long ago, was, I think, arguably one of the greats. Another one I think is really good is Tom Mesereau, who represented Robert Blake and I think Michael Jackson, right? And if you look at great defense attorneys, they can always take something negative about a client and work some judo and spin it around. Like everything's an opportunity instead of a concession. So I think he made a tactical error. I think he gave up ground that was unnecessary to give up. He should have said, look what this vicious prosecution is doing to my client, that they're making her look bad, that they're forcing her into these positions. Like there's a way to counterpunch that, what he did is just giving up, right? It's just, I'm frustrated and I'm going to let my anger, toward her come out a little bit.
I'm going to show my frustration.
Yeah. We see the same thing, I don't think he did a bad job, but the attorney that represented Timothy McVeigh, there was this sense by a lot of people that he didn't really try that hard, right? Because this guy killed a lot of people. I think he actually did try hard, but the evidence was, it was an unwinnable case. But yeah, sometimes it is very hard to represent criminals that the public really hates and that the jury really hates. So I think it can be tempting to say, I don't like her either. But it's a wasted opportunity. You never absorb a blow. You always return fire. Good attorneys always, defense attorneys anyway, they're always on the attack, and they're they got to be on their toes. And I think at some point maybe that just speaks to the exhaustion that attorney was under with Jodi Arias working on him, and how effective she was, how annoying she really was.
I mean, 18 days on the stand, that's longer than some murder trials actually last, like from beginning to end.
Yeah, 2 weeks is a fairly common length for a simple murder trial. Yeah, so 18 days, that's a lot.
And that was just her testimony. That was just Jodi.
Yeah.
To put it in perspective, and this perspective really hits me, in the time between when the murder happened and when she was actually sentenced, but when the murder happened, I hadn't even started college yet. And by the time she was sentenced and everything was all done, I had finished college a year before that or something like that. So I could get a bachelor's degree in the time that all of this happened, and in less time than all this happened and was wrapped up. Which, I mean, that's crazy for me to think about that was a long period of my life, right? And how much more so for all the lawyers, for Jodi, of course, for the family members, especially Travis's family members who had to go through all of this, the media coverage and everything, and Jodi's media coverage, how much she would try to be in the media and things like that. That must have just been excruciating for everyone involved.
Yeah, she caused a lot of pain. That was her thing.
So what was your other favorite moment in the trial? You said you had two.
So the shirt. Now I think this was during maybe the sentencing. Jodi was trying to get sympathy, and she had a shirt made, and so she's standing. Now she's been convicted, right? And so not a whole lot of people like her, right? And so she has this shirt, and she's trying to get sympathy. She holds it up to, I don't know if the jury was there, but definitely the members, people that were in the courtroom, family members of Travis were in there. She holds the shirt up and says that she's, on the side of people who have been abused, and she's standing with them and trying to support them and things like that. And she the tone that she uses is just so puzzling to me. It has no sense of I feel so guilty for what I did or anything, but let me stand with these other people that I may not have any idea what they're going through, but I'm still giving this image, trying to present this image of, I know what they're going through. I'm one of them. I'm the victim here, things like that. And it was so ridiculous. And you could tell by the faces of the people who she was talking to that they were like, what is going on here? I mean, theatrics aside, this is ridiculous.
So for those who haven't seen it, it was a white T-shirt that had the word "survivor" emblazoned across the front of it, like right across the center of the chest. And her whole spiel was about how she was going to give all of the proceeds from these T-shirts to charitable organizations that deal with battered women, just as a big play and a big play. It was really one of the most disingenuous moments of the whole thing. Like here she's still holding on to this story, even though she's been convicted, and like nobody believed that. She's still, I'm the victim here, and I'm going to help other victims, and I'm all for helping other victims, but there's a certain point when you've been convicted, and even if you want to proclaim your innocence, you do it in a much more stately fashion.
Well, and more indignant.
And yeah,
right? I mean, look at like Michael Morton or somebody, indignant, like, I'm mad. This is horrible. Instead, she was kind of like painting this victim narrative without addressing, like if she was falsely convicted, she should have been angry.
It was virtue signaling.
Right.
It was a classic display of virtue signaling. It's like, look, I'm here doing this for all of these other victims out in the world. And it really came across disingenuous. It was
terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah. To be fair to Jodi Arias, or I should say, to the vendors, I bet the perpetrator shirts would have been a lot cheaper, right?
Yeah.
They could have sold a lot more.
I don't know. They probably would have sold a lot more perpetrator.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like
T-shirts,
cheaper and the better seller, right? Like
I know a lot of people who would have bought a perpetrator T-shirt.
Who would the money have gone toward, though? Perpetrators?
Yeah, well, Jodi Arias, yeah.
The Jodi Arias one. Yeah. I don't know who the money would have gone to. I think a lot of police organizations would have purchased those, just so they could have them for the role play kind of things. Like
the
vendor can tell the difference between the perpetrators and the victims in their role play, like paintball.
It's very stylized writing, though, and that really, for me, really added to this gimmick of not only was it the shirt, but she stylized the writing. And it seemed to be meant for a certain crowd of people that would appreciate wearing this and really have meaning to it and like feel like the shirt looked good too. It was terrible.
Yeah. So the vendor was yet another victim there. Right? Yeah, that was a horrible moment. That was a good one to bring up, though. Yeah.
I don't want us to come across as sort of like we're patting ourselves on the back for making fun of Jodi Arias, but she did it.
She makes it easy.
This isn't one of those cases like where Darlie Routier.
Yeah, it was a doubt.
Like where it's like, did she do it? Didn't she do it? It's not even like some other cases where there was clear abuse and we're trying to figure out like, okay, is this just manslaughter good enough, or should we say, yes, it was completely justified. Jodi Arias' story about being abused just doesn't hold up, and the character of Travis was assassinated during that trial, but I think that the truth of Travis was not as bad as the defense made it. I think there was some physicality. I think there was definitely some emotional stuff, but I think that it was that codependent and meshed kind of thing where it came from both sides, super toxic relationship between each other. And just by taking those out of context and trying to paint Jodi as the complete victim, backfired. Mm-hmm. And it really felt like as if they painted her as being just as culpable in the abusive pattern. They would have seen like, okay, well, it ramped up and it did get to the point where she had to defend her life. But that's not the way they went. They tried to make Jodi this complete innocent person in all of this when it became clear to the jury it wasn't the case.
Yeah, I think juries respond to realism. So, to your point, I think if they had said, look, she's a person, she's made some mistakes in these and other relationships, maybe he gets a little too intense, maybe too needy, a little bit stalky, but Travis was bad too. And then in this particular moment, he attacked and she defended herself. Like really focus on the moment of the attack and not, kind of gloss over and just kind of concede that she's not perfect. But that's not really a big concession because the jury was going to figure that out anyway. Mm-hmm. So you're getting in front of that a little bit without having to say, you don't like your client or whatever. You get in front of that a little bit and like, look, there's dirty laundry everywhere in this story. But let's focus on the actual moment when, the stabbing happened and the gunshot went off. Yeah. So those are your final thoughts on it?
Yeah. That's all I got. Yeah.
You got, Mike?
That pretty much my final thoughts. Like Jodi, she's definitely guilty of this. A lot of the stuff in the cases can be really funny, but at the end of the day, Travis Alexander is still dead. She's in prison, and it becomes a tragedy for the families of both people to have to live with that and deal with that. Despite the sensational nature of the sex amongst the LDS community and the huge thing that it became in the media, it's an interesting case to talk about. But Jodi did it. There's no question.
Yeah. I think she was guilty. I never thought the self-defense thing made any sense based on the facts of the case. I mean, if you go with the fantasy that she had, still doesn't really fit together too well. Like, even if you believe a lot of what she says, it doesn't make sense. I think she was, again, leaving her options open and decided that she was going to kill him. And that's what she did. So another case here that involves LDS, a lot of the cases that we will cover in the future, I think some we've already covered actually, involved LDS. I don't know if it's just coincidence or maybe LDS cases become more popular, but I kind of feel sorry for that belief system that so many of these cases get tied to them. I don't think it was a big part of her behavior.
Mm-hmm. I don't either. I don't want to make fun of LDS, but every time I watch 2020, there's almost like a drinking game you can play with that. It's like, are they going to mention the Mormon church? Are they going to say Mormon or LDS? If they say one of those things, you take a drink and you watch. If you binge watch, you'll be really drunk within a couple of episodes.
Yeah, it's definitely overrepresented in the stories that are covered a lot by the media. I don't think it's overrepresented among belief systems in crime. I think it gets selected, and there's definitely some strange figures that have operated who happen to have that belief system at the same time. So yeah, and most cases in Utah, of course, would involve it. But Utah's not really. I mean, it's a big place geographically, but there's not a lot of population in Utah relative to like California. Although California has some phenomenal crime as well. So I guess it all depends on what you're focused on. But yeah, it does seem to come up a lot.
A lot of our cases that we've done so far, there's been a lot from California. We've gotten pretty familiar with universities in California, with police departments,
like Cal Poly,
with specific areas in there, and how they operate, and how those certain laws affect it, and everything. So yeah, there's a common theme there too.
Yeah, a lot of cases are from California, and quite a few are from Florida. I've noticed in doing this for a while.
And Texas.
Yeah, in a way, though, I kind of look forward to Texas cases because Texas Monthly might cover it, and they do such a great job at, they're a great resource for videos. But yeah, Texas, you see some, is population-based, right? You're also going to see a lot in like New York just because of the population. But yeah, certain states definitely bring a lot of crime value. So my final thoughts on this case, I think that for Travis, Jodi was the physical embodiment of his own shame. Right? That's repeatedly what we see with the pattern. He kept going back to her. He was mad at himself for wanting her so much. And eventually she became the vehicle of his destruction. So I think that, maybe speaks to that pattern of shame and how it's not healthy. Doesn't usually lead to murder, but in his case, it did. Maybe one of the keys is if you're doing something that causes a lot of shame, reevaluate. Not that it was his fault what happened, but just, again, the seatbelt analogy with the stop sign. He had an opportunity, several opportunities, to not get murdered. He didn't know that the consequence would be homicide, but if he had acted in a way that was moving away from shame, he would have actually been a lot safer. So, I think just maybe too, staying in volatile relationships is a risk factor that you should just avoid if you can. It's just, it can lead to death.
Being so focused on one part of the relationship like he was, yeah, that certainly hurt him, especially with the shame. And I hear that a lot from people, that they get caught in these shame cycles of, I believe one thing, but I'm doing something different, and that causes my behavior to to be worse or to suffer, and therefore I do a lot of things that I regret later and so forth. I'm sure that we've all experienced something like that in our lives, but that's a common theme in people that I think tend to reach out for counseling because they have issues that they at the time didn't realize they were having, but then they were able to realize, wait a minute, I'm doing something wrong. I got to switch what I'm doing here, to your point.
Yeah, I think a counselor would have saved his life, because they would have said, this is not sustainable. This shame cycle is not good for you or for Jodi.
Mm-hmm.
You're focused on marriage. Focus on marriage if that's your goal. But yeah, I think he had some decisions to make, and he was trying to stay in between two worlds, and he fell between that crack. Very unfortunate. Tragic death. I mean, by every indicator, he would have lived. We would have been married. He would have had a family. He would have been successful selling prepaid legal or recruiting, whatever. But
motivational speaking.
Yeah, motivational speaking. But unfortunately, all that came to an end. So that is the case of Jodi Arias. Definitely one of the classic cases of true crime. Interesting case. If you have any thoughts about it, please put those thoughts in the comments. We always enjoy reading those. Often I get a lot of insight from the comments. Really quite interesting. Thank you so much for watching this episode of The Murder Part. We'll talk to you soon.